Okay. The meeting will now come to order. Welcome to the June 26, 2023 City of Asheville Board of Adjustment meeting. My name is Paul Wilczynski. I am the chair of this board. The Board of Adjustment is a quasi-judicial body that is governed by the North Carolina General Statutes and the city's Unified Development Ordinance. We are authorized to hear requests for variances from the city's Unified Development Ordinance, also referred to as the UDO, appeals from final determinations made by city officials charged with enforcement of the city's UDO, requests for reasonable accommodations, and other requests as may be provided in the city's ordinances. The first thing on the agenda is review and adoption of the minutes from the May 2023 meeting. As I assume members of the board know, are aware of, we just got those minutes this morning. So I'm going to ask anyone who hasn't, so because I can ask that we move this agenda item until the next meeting, if I could get a show of hands of anyone who has not had a chance to review those minutes. Okay, so we have one person who has not had a chance to review the minutes. Can I get a motion to move this agenda item to the next meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so the review of the May 22nd meeting minutes is moved to the next board meeting. We now begin the evidentiary hearings for the cases listed on the agenda. In hearing cases, the board conducts a quasi-judicial evidentiary hearing. That means it is like a court hearing. State law sets specific procedures and rules concerning how this board must make its decisions. These rules are different from some other type of land use decisions like rezoning cases, which are legislative in nature. This board's decisions are constrained by the standards in the city's ordinances and the facts presented at the hearing. The board hears and considers evidence presented at the hearing and applies the standards set forth in state law and the city's ordinance. The board must base its decisions upon competent, material, and substantial evidence presented at the hearing. If you will be speaking as a witness, please focus on the facts and standards, not personal preference or opinion. Participation is limited. This meeting is open to the public. Everyone is welcome to watch. Parties have rights to participate fully. Parties may present evidence, call witnesses, and make legal arguments. Witnesses may testify as to facts to which they are competent to testify, so long as those facts relate to the legal standards. In addition, lay or not expert witness testimony is limited to facts, not opinions. For certain topics, this board needs to hear opinion testimony from expert witnesses. These topics include projections about impacts on property values and projections about impacts on traffic safety. For variance requests, a 4/5 vote of the board is required to grant the variance. For all other hearings and matters, and I assume that includes appeals, including the adoption of minutes, the decision will be made by a simple majority of the vote of the board. Witnesses must swear or affirm their testimony. At this time, we will administer the oath for all individuals who intend to provide witness testimony. So please stand if you plan to provide testimony or if there is any very small chance you might want to. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence you shall give to the board in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Okay. For our first variance, the petitioner, Arthur Lowley, on behalf of owner Mark Hurt, is requesting a variance to the accessory dwelling unit standards in section 714(1B)(4)B, accessory uses and structures of the Unified Development Ordinance, or UDO. The petitioner is seeking relief for a single accessory structure, maximum footprint of 800 square feet, and total footprint of accessory structures of 1,000 square feet. For an addition to an existing accessory structure at 173 Macomb Avenue, pin 9649-77-9602. Mr. Starbaum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Good to see you this afternoon. Again, for the record, my name is Sam Starbaum. I am a planner 2 with Development Services down at 161 South Charlotte Street. And as the chair said, we have a variance request for accessory structure standards at 173 Macon Avenue. This is a little different than all my other presentations. There's a lot of things that are going to be different about today's meeting. So what I'm going to do is I will provide the context maps, the variances, what has happened, and then I'm going to talk about what can and can't be reviewed in this case. This will go a little bit different than any other accessory structure case you have seen this year. So we're going to go ahead and move forward with what's before us. Again, the summary as provided by the chair. One quick correction, that's actually Artur Lori, as made clear by the applicant. And you can see the variance request here. What the applicant is looking to do is increase the amount for one singular accessory structure by 19%, or 179 square feet, for a total of 979 square feet for one single accessory structure, and then increase the overall amount of accessory structures to 1,099 square feet, which is 99 square feet in excess of what is allowed for parcels 1 acre or less. And I want to be clear that at 32,000 square feet, this is less than an acre and is only granted 1,000 square feet. So where in Asheville are we? Of course, we are in North Asheville. This is just at the foothills of Town Mountain. You can actually see that there in the north as illustrated by the star. A little bit closer, it's right at the intersection of Macon and Sunset. We are actually not that far from Grove Park. You can of course see the golf course there. And the zoning is a little unique, so there are still pockets of RM6 nearby, but really Sunset Trail and Macon Avenue, this is really the starting point where you will see the ocean of RS2 and RS4, especially moving east up the hill to Town Mountain and north as you get further to Beaver Dam Valley, where it is predominantly RS2 and RS4, which are lower density standards. And this is what we have before us. So I'm going to talk about what was built and when. This is the home. I have to admit, this is not my photo. Thank you, Zillow. They always have a house photo available. So this is 173 Macon Avenue. This was built in 1918, as was the accessory structure, which you can see here and does not include that black square. Both of these were built in 1918. This was, of course, before we had UDO. This is, of course, before we had zoning, before we had any of those standards. However, that accessory structure is at 782 square feet. So as it is conforming right now. Then, in 2010, the applicant applied for and received a permit under permit number 10-05375 for the addition of a greenhouse accessory structure, which was 120 square feet. You can see this here. This is at a foundation, on a foundation, received permits for. So at this point, they are approximately just shy of their total permitting or allowances for the square footage. So with the 120 square foot structure, that brought them to 847 overall, so their allowance was close. Then, in 2022, the applicant applied for 2 permits. One of them was for an accessory structure to be added on to the existing accessory structure. So it was more of an addition than an independent accessory structure. And he also applied for a permit to repair the porte cochere attached to the home. Immediately, the review specialist, Haley Mahoney, put the review on hold for the accessory structure, saying this is going to kick you over. This will kick you into where we are today. This will, if this were to be proposed, this would bring you to 1,099 square feet for overall accessory structures, and it would be in excess of what is allowed for one single accessory structure because it is attached to the original 1918 structure. So that is where we are today. You can actually see what was added. The contractor has gone ahead and made the accessory structure addition. What had happened was Mr. Laurie had called in an inspection on the porte cochere permit, which was different, was not on hold. Very clearly, Haley Mahoney had sent him an email and notice and put the accessory structure permit on hold. However, when the building inspector was out approving the porte cochere addition and renovations, he had made comments about engineering for the accessory structure, right? So what we are seeing here is what is already constructed. Again, sort of like when you're at the optometrist, you got 1, 2, 1, 2. What you're seeing here is this structure which has already been added on and brings this out of compliance in terms of the overall size of one accessory structure and total overall structures. This is the standard we look at. This is what we as planners measure accessory structures for. So again, your maximum size is going to be 800 square feet. And then also it is based on lot size, where you are looking at for less than 1 acre, again, 1,000 square feet. If it's 1 to 3 acres, you get 1,600 square feet, more than 3 acres. No limit. I can't say that I have ever seen any property like that in town. So this is where we're at. That is the chronology of what is built, what is on the property of 173 Macon Avenue, and how we got here. This is a little complicated though, right? Because this is, I think we have seen this before with 26 Broadview and also the driveway on Cranford Road. Even though I showed you what has already been built, as a review board, you have to review this as if this is a new application. So this is somewhat as if it hasn't been built. So the standard question still apply, or the 4 standards for a variance still applies, but this would be as if it were a new application. So that is about the development, what is and is not allowed for review, and what brought us here, and I would be happy to stand any questions that you may have. Thank you.
So, Sam, the applicant, when they received I'm assuming they received a zoning permit for the Portico addition.
They did not need to. It was
They did
building
not.
only.
It was building only?
Yes.
Okay. So you don't ever have to show setbacks and meeting setbacks on the site plan or anything like that, or is that?
It was, and the applicant can speak to what was on that permit, but there was nothing that would indicate it would be expanded in there. It was renovation of existing only and some work there, but it was never reviewed by zoning. Whereas the accessory structure addition was.
And did the applicant ever make any mention about how he was going to reconcile the square footage issue or to get the permitting of the
No.
addition? Okay.
That seems to be attached. Is that
That
still
is-
considered an accessory dwelling if it's attached to the?
So
main
this is just
residence?
considered, it is not separate from the existing 1918 accessory structure. It is an add-on. So they are adding the 120 to the existing footprint already. So this would still be considered one building. So they're actually just increasing the footprint, making this non-conforming by being, yeah, 975. So it's not a dwelling unit. They're just adding what is in effect a tool shed to the existing accessory structure to bring that out of compliance because it is now 979 square feet. So it's not a different structure. It's an enlargement.
So the first photograph is the main house.
Mhm.
This, okay,
Mm.
okay.
Does the board have any other questions for Mrs. Starbaum? Thank you.
If you want to toggle through here, you know, you can use the photos as necessary. Let's do that. I'll say, yeah, you just,
Okay.
yeah. Thank you.
Would you please identify yourself for the record?
My name is Artur Lolly. Thank you for creating the platform for this. This wasn't the plan to spend the day here today, but Mr. Starbaum, thank you for an impressive work, I must say. Allow me to go through a very short timeline and allow me to read to make it easier for everybody. I'll be more than happy to answer questions, of course. In fact, October the 27th, Mr. Starbaum referenced Haley Mahone sent an email saying permit number 22-08257 for garage shed addition will be on hold for revision pending more information regarding square footage. This was the time that the project was placed on hold. I will talk a little bit more about that. On December the 20th, Misty Lipe, forgive me for butchering language, Lipe, Misty, send an email with instructions for scheduling inspection for 21-07202 through the online platform. December the 22nd, the inspection was completed for footing with result of disapproved. This was for permit 21-07202 in the title, but the footing work was for 22-08257. The inspector did not make note on the fact that the project work did not align with the permit description for which it was requested. Inspector recommended further excavation and/or having an engineer letter, and we have that as well. January the 25th, 2023 fooding inspector per design professional inspection form with Jeffrey Brown, Mr. Brown, professional engineer. And then again, I have the letter dated on March the 8th, 2023. On February the 14th, inspection was completed on portico share for permit 210-07202. An inspection was completed with the result not applicable. Note that the inspection was done on wrong permit number, the portico share. The project description includes a reference to the garage shed, adding and permit number 22-08257. March the 8th, 2023, design professional inspection form from Jeffrey Brown, professional engineer with Brown consultant, PA, signed with seal. Going fast as I could, and I feel guilty for taking the time, but please allow me. Thank you. Of course, when we realized that the only options were to either demolish the shed or apply for a variance, I had to ask someone what is a variance. So this was explained, and that's why I'm here. Unnecessary hardship and would result from the strict application of the ordinance. So going with some fact, the shed has been fully completed with high quality construction, including footers inspected and certified by a professional engineer, including 5-inch concrete slab. Photos show the architectural detail of the structure match the primary residence on the lot. To destroy the shed additional would cause damage to the existing garage wall and cause the homeowner, project manager, and contractor to incur additional expense beyond what is cost to be built. The argument is that the shed addition was built with the belief that the permit had been approved. Both permits 22-08257 and permit 21-07202 reference the shed addition to the garage. Contractor requested inspections for the project, which were completed but on the 21-07202. It was not clear to the contractor that the inspections had not been done on the 22-08257, which was the only portion of the project underway at the time the inspections were requested. The hardship results from the condition that they are peculiar to the property, such as location, size, and topography. So the hardship results from the confusion due to two permits number for the same overall project of the same address. When the contractor requested inspection for footers on December 2022, the inspection did not pass. However, it was not brought to their attention that the inspection was being done on a portion of the project without an issued permit. In the inspector's recommendation, the contractor and project manager involved the professional engineer to review and approve the further excavation and updated plans on the upgraded footers and wall structure design professional inspection form. Argument: the initial inspection of the footer should have resulted in a notice that the permit for the shed additional to the garage was still pending. The recommendation to move forward with the engineer letter gave the impression that there were no further issues with the initial stages of the project. Again, we have that, Mr. Starbaum, we have that engineer form sealed from the engineer. I have it, I can add it to the, if you wish.
Yeah, if you want to add it to the record, we can.
And the hardship on the fact the work continued on the project based on the advice given in the inspection in late December 2022. The contractor, project manager, and the owner were all trying to ensure the project not only met, but exceeded the city's requirements by working with the engineer for further inspection and certification. At no point did the inspector indicate a mismatch between the project work and the permit number. The owner should have been. So I wrote over here that at this point the owner should not be penalized for this mistake. Please allow me to mention the last facts in the last page of this. The requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and the intent of the ordinance, such that public safety is secured and substantial justice is achieved. The fact the owner has shown intent to follow city UDO and use a tasteful approach to this development of the property. It is without any doubt that the special care and expense that has been taken to ensure the accessory structures are safe and visually appealing. The argument, the existing shed addition to the garage does not present any public safety concerns, nor does it visually disrupt the appeal of the property on the neighborhood. This is a 3/4 of an acre lot. I was told it's among, I think, the second or the first biggest lot in the map that Mr. Starbaum showed. And nor the contractor nor the owner intended to exceed the city's accessory square footage limit. Nor would either party have proceeded with the work had they understood the permit for the shed addition to the garage portion of the project was not yet approved. And as final thoughts, I just want to make sure that I mention that my interaction with the city representatives, and I'm not saying this because Mr. Starbaum is in front of me, but has been nothing but positive. Very helpful. At the beginning, I did not know the facts. I did not know what was going on. And then I realized later, my goodness, this is, I didn't know, a mess, a mishap, oversight. So I'm not here to be against the city. I'm simply not. I want to mention Haley's name as well, nothing but very helpful. And I mentioned at the beginning of when I started the timeline, the project was put on hold. It did not help because Mrs. Hertz, unfortunately, was diagnosed with cancer and still fighting. So everything froze, and of course, the focus was for Mr. Hertz to take care of his wife. And here we are with the project manager trying to make this a fun, small project. It turned into something that we had no intention. In no way or shape, I have the courage or anybody else to build something that was bigger than it was intended or was not intended at all. But I want to emphasize that my interaction has been nothing but positive. Forgive me, let me have a final look. And the future, I actually was aware of the future plans. As you can see, some of the grassy area where the truck is parked and all that, this is all the beginning of a plan to redo this from the very beginning, make it quite appealing, including a fountain, all kind of things that Mr. and Mrs. Hertz wish to improve the property. I guess I can answer questions as much as I understand, or we'll ask your guidance, but I do want to thank you again for your time, and I do feel guilty that I'm here for something like this. This was not the intention at all. Forgive me for one more summarize. We're not asking for the approval of the shed. We're asking for the difference of Mr. Starbaum for 100 extra of 179.
Yep.
Thank you. The numbers match. And that's all I have. And again, thank you for creating the platform. May I stay here for any other questions? I can come back again, or anything at all.
Yeah, let me
Please.
start with, I would normally ask the board first, but so I don't forget. I completely understood everything you said up until your last sentence, which was, I'm not here for the approval of the shed, I'm here for the approval of the square feet.
Something is lost in translation. He is there for the approval of the addition. What it is there are no other substantive barriers to this being constructed and conforming other than what is found here in 714 1B, because it adheres to the setbacks. Everything else could be met by this, but I mean, really, the only ask here is for 179 square feet addition to the existing, and then of course the 99 square feet over the allowed 1,000 on this parcel.
Okay, so just to be clear for me, we are talking about the addition.
We are, and forgive me, sir.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We are.
We are.
Yeah.
Forgive me that I see how they can be misleading. I apologize, that was not the intention. We are here to approve hopefully the shed and continue with this fun, interesting project.
Okay. I'm gonna ask one more question.
Please.
And then, as Mr. Starbaum said in his presentation, we are obligated to pretend that the shed doesn't exist. Okay. So when you spoke about hardship, you were referring to the hardship in terms of the shed already existing. So could you, is there anything that you can say about what a hardship would exist if the shed didn't exist and you were coming here to build one and we were to say no? Then what would the hardship be?
It's a
Okay,
legitimate.
I'm not sure that's clear. Is that clear?
It is, and if it's not, then I will perhaps allow me to ask question back and we can clarify together, but it's a legitimate question. Thank you for that. So it's obvious that the shed is built, of course, and in my view, it's way overbuilt with all kind of engineer, that's what Mr. and Mr. Hurst wish to build, and so to detach that, as you can see, from the existing structure, I actually saw it because it was an option. What we can do will destroy, actually, will damage, not destroy, forgive me, will destroy the existing structure. Again, on your left, on your right, on your right as well, yes. As far as hardship, I'm trying to think of how this can be destroyed, and there is no doubt that I have lost sleep for something like this, and to the jackhammering, all the feet of concrete and the walls, it's something quite difficult to comprehend.
Well, pretend that it was, what we have to do, what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to pretend that shed does not exist.
Okay.
Okay, so pretend we're starting from,
Yes.
there's only the original
Yes.
structure. Okay, what would the hardship be for not being able to build the shed as an addition?
You can help me, Mr. Sam, as well. So the owner, I think, would still apply for the permit to build the shed. It will be 179 square foot smaller. It will be in the same size. It will be in the same shape. It would be smaller. So we're trying to make it smaller. If this is the shed, then I'm trying to shave this much, 179 square foot. Did I answer your question, sir?
No, and let me ask this in a different way,
Please.
if you don't mind, Mr. Laurie. What is the purpose of the shed and why does your applicant need it? So imagine you are responding to the email initially sent by Haley Mahoney to your
Yes.
clients.
Yes. The purpose of the shed is only for his tools that he has, and he has hobbies with quite elaborate, as I have heard and seen some of them. Help me with the words as CMC saws, or things. A lot of I'm going to use the word expensive tools that he has, and it's a tool shed. There's nothing there. There's not even a door, anything like that, besides the door that you can see in the front. The project manager and I were wondering why, in fact, this is such a building, but he wished to match with the rest, and just simply overbuild because it simply could. Even though, if I may take it just a few seconds further, from where I stand I'm part of the mess up this. And so is the project manager. There's no way around it. But this is not the fault of the owner. It's not. And especially during the hardship, it's heart-wrenching for me that now he's dealing with also this, and I'm sure this is not really about making a very small profit. Now it's more for doing the right thing, the dignity as well, and then making things right, especially during the hard time that he's passing with his wife. Did I answer the question, sir?
Yeah, I'm fine. Okay, any other members of the board have any questions? Have any other questions besides mine?
Please.
Is this condition space?
Condition means air conditioned, right?
Yes.
Yes, forgive me that I have
It
to
is.
translate
No,
things.
that's fine.
It is not, madam.
It is? or
It is not.
It is not?
It is not.
Okay. What are the dimensions of that shed?
14 by 18. Allow me to. We talk to you, and of course, it is yours. So, 14 by 18.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Sam, tell me, how much smaller do we need this to be to come into compliance? Is it 179 square feet?
179 square feet, and then also, this is a variance for 714-1B4, because that has both the single and the overall for accessory structures. So yes, 179 for a single structure. Because of that existing permit in 2010, it is also for the extra 99 square feet overall. So only 179 square feet.
Yeah, gotcha.
Who's overseeing the permits?
Forgive me, sir, I did not catch the first word.
Who is overseeing? Are you a project
Oh, the
manager?
I actually am the contractor.
And you
and-
did that?
yes.
You were overseeing the permits
Yes,
specifically?
yes. And we have actually worked, the project manager actually worked before on many projects around the house, including painting the house, took many months, restoring and keeping actually the historic look that thankfully Sam saw it from the front. So we've had many projects before for the same person. He's been quite lovely, quite nice, wonderful man, generous, takes care of cats, on and on the story goes.
Are there any other questions from the board?
Have you explored how you could bring this shed, this addition into compliance at all by reducing, say you left the roof structure and had an extensive overhang and you pulled the walls in on one side or the other? I don't know which side is the 14 and which is the 18, but if it was the 18, you need to bring it in to like 10, so like taking off 4 feet.
We have, as of a worst case scenario, to be honest with you, madam, and so the connection of the structure actually, I was just reminded, started a long time ago as an idea of making it by 2x4, 2x6, and in fact then he changed his mind on making it with a cement block and cement. So all the iron beams that are there, it is almost like shaving, so to speak, or slicing it, Trust me, I've spent some time there, and that was part of the disappointment that we all had with this.
Are those garage doors, or is that just an architectural feature?
This is, the word is, help me with the sliding, thank you, barn doors. They're not
okay.
garage door. No, you cannot park there. There's architecture, actually quite expensive, and we thought, why would you? Yeah, but they're not garage doors.
Would that actually fix it, or is it about the footprint?
It's about the footprint.
And as I was looking at the Miss White, I was considering, then the corner, knowing from the owner knows enough about building as well, from the back of the house to the neighbor, he has followed all the rules, he knew enough about it, and that's why the frustration is like, how did we miss something like this? And in fact, we did. And this is when the inspector came, mechanical on the slab, need drawing and engineering letter, so we provided letter as well from the engineering, which I have it here. And even on the engineering form, forgive you, and I'm not trying to but even the permit number is the wrong one. They provided that from the city. We had no idea again.
Are there any other questions from the board? Thank you very much.
No, I thank you, sir.
Is there anyone from the public who would like to comment? No one from the public? Is there a motion from the board?
Without interrupting, Mr. Paul, may I submit the design engineer? Would you want that?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. To this.
Yeah.
One and two?
Yep.
Okay. I've been asked to do this before. Here. May I ask Sam?
Stay here.
Sure. Okay.
Sam, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So, just trying to understand how this didn't trigger a zoning permit. It looks like the structure was placed on top of already pre-existing impervious surface. So it would not have triggered stormwater or a erosion control plan or?
So, this is what makes my job particularly unpleasant from time to time, is there are several permits that we look at for a project. There are some that apply, there are some that don't. A zoning permit was triggered for this because it was part of the footprint and it was an expansion of an existing accessory structure. It was less than 500 square feet, so grading was not triggered. So really, it is building and zoning which are in play. Zoning was on hold. I cannot speak for the building department. As submitted there, something happened, but the onus is upon the applicant to handle both all permits associated with the project. It is something, again, something happened with the building. I wasn't there. I know Mr. Brown. I can't speak to his intent or actions, but the fact of the matter is in October, before any of this happened, Haley sent the email and put this on hold. So in Excel, you can actually not request a zoning inspection if it is on hold. So this was a building inspection entered on a different permit.
Okay.
But there is, this would not require stormwater because it's not the size. It wouldn't require grading. It is only zoning and building.
Okay. That's clear.
Cool.
Thank you.
So is there a motion?
Okay. Motion to approve.
I'm sorry.
Just a motion to approve.
Motion to, okay, there's a motion to approve the request for the variance. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there, I will make one general comment, and this, I will make one general comment, and that is, I feel bad when honest mistakes are made.
My seconding did not indicate how I was going to be,
No, that's absolutely fine.
Right,
I-
okay.
As people hear me or may not know, I always want positive
right.
motions because negative motions get very confusing to me.
That's why you got your second.
Thank you. Okay.
For me, I just did not hear from the applicant or in the application that there was a specific hardship related to the land, to the building, to the orientation of the building or the circulation inside of the house or anything to really show that there was a physical constraint with this addition, to the addition.
Okay, does anyone else from the board have any Any discussion to contribute to it?
For me, I just didn't see it met the hardships at all.
Okay.
And, so I will make my decision based on it.
Okay. Anyone else?
Mr. Chair, I would just volunteer that you all, and I think you all know this, you're not strictly confined to what the applicant has presented in order to find whether there is or is not a hardship. Any of the materials before you could lead you to that. It doesn't have to be something that's been expressly stated by the applicant. So to the extent that the lot size is very near the threshold to go into a larger amount of ADU space, anything like that, that you've seen before you, that would all be viable. You're not strictly constrained to what was presented.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Okay, there no other discussion? Okay, board members, when I say your name, please say aye or nay. Ms. Gotzi?
Nay.
Mr. Fundanish?
Nay.
Mr. Smith?
Nay.
Ms. White?
Aye.
And Paul Mazursky says aye. Unfortunately, the request for the variance is denied.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Tyler, do you need this?
Okay, Mr. Kelly? The petitioner, Corey Price of Evolve Early Learning, on behalf of the property owner, Hill Realty LLC, is requesting a variance to the section 7816F5 highway business development standards setbacks of the Unified Development Ordinance. The petitioner is seeking relief for construction of an accessory structure in the 35-foot front setback at 5 Woodland Drive, Unit A, pin 9628-32-2558. Mr. Kelly.
So nor I, nor the applicant were here during the swearing in, so not to,
Oh, okay.
I apologize, Caitlin.
yeah.
Okay, can you stand?
My name is Court Price.
Okay, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence you shall give to the board in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the board. We have here 5 Woodland Drive. I'm Tyler Kelly, residential review specialist with DSD, Development Services. So the applicant, Corey Price, is requesting a variance to the development standards in section 7816F5, which speak directly to the setbacks for this underlying zoning district, specifically the front setback, which is 35 feet, for the construction placement of aluminum shade structure to meet the existing North Carolina child care licensing that they have approved for their property. The shade structure will provide shade for the child care business that serves infants and toddlers with disabilities. The nearest corner of the shade structure is 10 feet away from the front property line along Woodland Drive, as stated by the applicant's drawing. Therefore, that would be a 66% allowance, or 20 feet. The subject property is 1.75 acre commercial lot, zoned highway business, and is bounded by the south by the railroad right-of-way, the north by Woodland Drive, and RM8 residentially zoned parcels to the north, pretty much everywhere else around there. The existing primary structure is a 10,256 square foot Class D commercial building constructed in 1965. The second structure not associated with this business is a one-story, 10,000 square foot Class S commercial building constructed in 1974. Just general, if you've been to the site, there's various shade structures, fences, and storage containers on the property. I'm not really sure of that history. The applicant can speak to that. The only 2 buildings found on the property card are the 2 which I described. You have Exhibit A. This is just the vicinity map. The subject parcel is in the center, outlined in blue. You can see the railroad to the south. Woodland Drive runs along that western to north corner. Here again, you can see highway business in red, RM8 in the orange color. This is the best shot I could get from Google Street View of where the shade structure would basically be at the front corner where the chimney stack is, and extend towards the point of view of the camera towards Woodland. Here is a wider shot of the back of the childcare building. You can see this larger fenced-in area and some shade sails attached directly to the building. This is the applicant provided site plan. Subject area is this black hash line. That's the license play area. And then the proposed shade structure play area is in orange with the distance from the property line listed as 10 feet. And that property line runs directly in the center of a wooded hill. It's pretty steep, drops in elevation roughly 8 to 12 feet along that the property line to the license play area. So it's approximately 400 square feet of shaded play area, but we're strictly just talking about, unlike the last case, we're strictly just talking about setbacks. The way that this property sort of operates is you come in off Woodland, you turn in right here to the parking area, and that serves as a drop-off for the parents and children. That's all I have.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? No?
Not for Tyler.
Thank you. Ms. Price?
Hi, thank you for hearing us out on this one.
Could you identify yourself?
Oh, yes, I'm Corey Price. I'm the director of Evolve Early Learning, also one of the building owners. And I'm here because we desperately need a shaded and weatherproof area for our youngest learners. We used to be a center that served kids 2.5 and above, and with the great need for infant toddler care in our town, we took this on as a grant from the EC County Fund. And we are establishing an infant toddler program that has been way more challenging than we ever could have known. I'm a teacher turned director, did not know I would be standing in front of city councils and things having these conversations, but I'm here to say that we would have a ultimate hardship if we could not have this play structure exactly in this place. The classroom doors that we see there near them give us easy access. It's also on our fire exit plan, so if we had a fire incident, we wouldn't have to reroute the kids into a different area from their play space. Everyone would end up at the same place, which is really important. Another hardship that we have right now is we have 5 infants who have nowhere to go outside right now, so they're being kind of rolled around in wagons, taken out here or there. Our other playgrounds are just not appropriate for that age. They have choking hazards, rowdy kids, that kind of thing. Why we didn't put it on all the other areas that you saw. The other areas are basically, when you see where it says Unit A, the front side of the building and that whole side along Woodland Drive are our playgrounds and the classroom spaces. Everything else is unfinished space that still needs to be mitigated for lead paint. So we're not letting our kids back anywhere over there until we get that all mitigated. So that would be an immense hardship on us if we had to rethink our infant toddler plan for that reason. Let me see if there's anything else. I can pause for a couple questions and then I might have like one more thing. I don't know if that's how this works or what would be best. And here, I'm very new to this, so please guide me.
Almost everybody is.
Okay, good.
Are there any questions from the board so far?
No.
None yet.
Please.
Okay. I think I want to talk a little bit about child development and the importance of having children a place that is where they can go out no matter what the weather is, something that is familiar and home-like. So we'll have rockers and just areas they can be out of the sun and out of the rain when it happens. And we need that gross motor space because in our classrooms, children really can't get that gross motor development that they need. The other thing that it kind of acts as for us is a place for families to gather. With COVID, we've really struggled to get families back in the building and to reconnect with families. And so we're looking at this little covered area as the only space on our campus where people feel comfortable coming, that they could be covered. We don't have to cancel for rain and we can still gather. And so it really has a dual purpose. It's kind of an outdoor living room for folks who maybe have more reasons to stay outside and that kind of thing. It would definitely be a multi-use purpose space. As far as thinking about the neighbors, you know, we've really tried to beautify this building and really make it something that the neighborhood wants us to have. We've never had a neighbor come to us and say that they've had a problem with anything that we've done or even the joyful laughter of our children. When we look at the building and I see that front classroom right there, it's a pretty high peak right there. So actually the shade structure is not going to be higher than that. We're not going to change anyone's view. And the trees on that wooded hill, we are very much in love with those trees and are going to maintain and take care of them. So there won't be this, you know, ugly structure in front of them. They get to kind of maintain their beautiful tree view there. We'll keep up with it. We'll keep it painted, make sure that it stays safe, make sure that it's attached appropriate, following all the North Carolina guidelines. And we won't make this mistake again. We've learned a lot by planning these things to start at the beginning and go backwards and have those early citizens meetings even on the things that are outside, which we just didn't know that the shade structure required this until a little late in the game. So we really do apologize for your time and attention for that oversight, but we're here now. The licensed play space is particularly challenging to get. It takes a long time for sanitation, fire, building, our licensing consultants to get out there. If we were having to create a new licensed play space, the infant room probably wouldn't be viable for a year. It would probably take us that long to get it back open under us. And then at that point, with hiring teachers and things, it's hard to say that we would actually be able to keep that going. So it's one of those things where it is like a kind of a domino effect. If we don't get this space to be for this age group, we might lose this age group altogether, which is a really tough age group. I think we've lost like 30-some centers, infant care in the last year here. So I know some of y'all probably have kids and know of the perils of childcare in Asheville. So please consider it. And if you have any more questions, I'd love to hear them. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. One question. I believe I just heard you say, and I just want to make sure I understand. If you did not get the variance, it sounded like what you said was there was a large possibility, but not 100% possibility that you would have to close. Is that?
The infant room might have to switch back to an older age group because without an outdoor area for their gross motor development, we're a 5-star center, we're high quality as everything goes. We're not going to do it unless we're the highest quality. And so not having a safe infant outdoor program really doesn't fit that need. And so we would probably consider moving it back to a 2.5 and older age group. We're already not wanting to do that, but we're finding it to be very difficult. So this is just one of those many things that would kind of lock it in for our community and for our teachers. It's also a teacher retention strategy, is to keep our teachers in there when they have babies, that they can continue to come to work. So it's very vital for our other classrooms as well.
Okay, how much of a demand have you seen for the infant service?
Hundreds. I haven't even advertised it, and I have over 100-person wait list from word of mouth. I have babies who haven't even been born. I have babies who have not even been conceived yet. It is hard, and it is harder to find teachers as well. So it's one of those things where we have a really good thing going, and we'd like to keep it going. We also center equity and inclusion in children with disabilities. We're one of the few centers that takes kids that have been kicked out of other facilities, and so we're looking at those parents who can't work because there's nowhere else for their kids a lot of times, and our infant program is a way to get our children under our wings sooner so that we can help them with early intervention before we get to those points where the parents are kind of struggling to figure out what to do next. It's a unique place in that way.
Thank you.
How tall is the shade structure?
Oh, good question. Let's see, it's in here. I don't know if you have any more information in front of you for significant. That information with you. husband and my father did the semantics for everything.
While you're looking that up, Tyler, is the building itself complying with the 35-foot setback?
No, the rest of the building definitely is not compliant with the, so it would be an existing nonconformity.
And so the layout of the building and what they have to work with is already non-complying with the 35-foot setback.
That's correct.
Those excessive front yard setbacks that I have been complaining about for a while seem to keep coming back. You don't have to comment on that.
Yeah.
If I may interject, there is something to that question. This was constructed in 1965, so it's not that it was a nonconformity that has been recent. This is the problem with
Yeah.
all of West Asheville.
Sure. This was compliant at the time.
Does this carport play area have to be in the licensed play area?
Yes.
That's my understanding.
The regulations ask for 5 feet fencing around it, so part of our work during COVID was to expand, and so all of that dotted purplish fencing is a 5-foot regulated fence, and so inside of that is where we can have the child spaces that are already licensed.
So this carport, this proposed, it just has to be a carport or just a covered area?
We could choose to do something. Carports are economical and they last long, so that's really why we chose that avenue. But it could be.
For the application, cannot consider it a carport. It's not a parking structure.
There's no way you could park there. Thank you. No, you could never park in there ever. You could not get a car in that space. There will be lots of tiny cars and scooters and things. But yes, it would not work anywhere else without the lengthy process, maybe even this is the issue, is if it takes a year for us to get new licensed space to move all of this, we might not have the capacity to keep the infant program held while we figure that out, because licensing and building and sanitation takes so long to navigate, plus the financial burden, that too.
And as I'm looking at your site plan and looking at the aerial photography, if you were to pull it back away and get it out of the setback, you would have to reconfigure your parking lot and change all of that around, which I don't think is feasible in that weird way that it points, you lose spaces, and, I don't know what the topography is out there, but, that could again become an issue as well, so. I think that's something to consider. You've got the railroad track, you've got this drive, you've got
Yes.
parking.
And the railroad track is only, I would say, 3/4 of the way fenced, and so that's another reason while staying in that fenced area that we see right there through those exits that are right there on that property is super important, because we do have kids who can run. We do have kids who, have anxiety or other things that happen to them, and they could run to the train track. And we also, in this world, we have had we have cameras and things right on this area. We have had some unsavory things happen in our area, and we have been on lockdown, and we've been on those things. I don't want my kids to have to travel to get anywhere. I want them to be able to go right inside on the door right there, especially if they're not mobile. And so these are things that are like, I don't know if licensing would actually approve it other places because of some of those things. And then there's the whole thing of fire, who would be a whole different discussion, and they might see it differently. And then there's the potential lead issue on the back as well.
And there's a tenant at the other end of the building, at the far end of the building, is that?
Currently it's just storage and
Okay.
warehouse, and that's pretty much what it's always been. If there was a tenant, it was just storage or warehouse. The building doesn't even have access in between it. It's very separate.
There are any other questions from the board?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak? There being no one, is there a motion?
I motion to approve.
Is there a second?
I second.
Is there any discussion? There being no discussion, board members, when I say your name, please say aye or nay. Ms. Gotzi?
Aye.
Ms. Weiss? I'm sorry, Mr. Ferdinand?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Ms. White?
Aye.
And Paul Lozinski votes aye. Your request for the variance is approved. Now we come to our appeal. This is the first appeal the board has heard in several years. I'm not even sure how many years anymore. So I'd like to start by introducing the board to Mr. Ron Sneed, who is an attorney who's representing the board in this case. And if I could ask other counsel's indulgence for a moment, if Mr. Sneed could explain the difference between appeals and variances, instruct the board as to what types of things we should listen for, how we make a decision in this sort of case, how board members might be able to use your wisdom and ask you questions about particular things that might come up. I would appreciate it.
I'll be happy to, Mr. Chairman. I'll ask about it. Blackberry with my voice. I developed allergies late in life, and they've got me right now. Everything in the world is in bloom. But I'm sat with this board now for about 25 years. And the chairman said we haven't had an appeal in a long time. Last time I was here was in 2019, so it's been a while. But with variances, you have the supermajority requirement, and you have some 4 very specific standards you have to find to run a variance. On appeals, how an appeal gets here is staff makes a decision. That decision or action affects the property owner or an adjoining property owner or property owner with standing, and that person takes an appeal. And that appeal has to be filed within 30 days of the time the decision is made or the property owner knows of the decision. This board just does not have jurisdiction to hear the appeal. It's not a decision to make, it just is. But what will come before you, and I'm probably no more familiar with this particular case than you are, I know you may be more familiar. But you've got, there's been a decision, some action by the city, and the property owner disagrees with that action. And then they appeal to this board. And what you're listening for is, and want to know, is what does the law say? How has the staff interpreted it the way they did and make their decision? You'll be listening to the opposition property owner, I assume in this case. We'll put on evidence or arguments. Sometimes there's very little in the way of evidence and a whole lot in the way of arguments as to how the law should be read and how it should be applied. This gets to be the fun part because you're actually making a decision on what the law says. I can give you some direction on that, some general interpretive guidance. I can't make the decision for you. So there's a fair chance you'll ask me questions and I'll confuse you more than enlighten you. But I'll try to do my best to tell you the rules that you apply when trying to interpret an ordinance. I will say that like I said, I haven't heard the arguments, I don't know where it's going, and I might be able to help interpret the direction the argument's going. That's about it. Happy to answer questions where I can, just can't make your decision. With any questions about these, and again, no supermajority. 3 will make the decision on this.
Any questions for Mr. Steve before we start? Okay. So in this appeal, Robert W. Oates Jr. on behalf of Summit Townhomes LLC and Apex Family Homes LLC is appealing zoning interpretation of section 759B site plan review for development projects except those on parcels zoned central business district and located in the downtown design review overlay district regarding proposed developments located at 294 Rock Hill Road, pin 9657-31-4215, and 11 West Chapel Road, pin 9657-31-1249. Mr. Starbaum will give us an introduction to the properties and the ordinances at issue.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Again, for the record, Sam Starbaum, Planner 2, City of Asheville, Development Services Department, 161 South Charlotte Street. And you'll have to forgive me, this is actually my first rodeo, so I do ask that, my understanding of the role here presently is I will be giving the chronology of how we got here and the staff decision, at which point the council will speak for their case. So that is what I am doing, is just presenting how we got to where we are today. And anyone can weigh in if that is not the case. Again, here is the summary. What we're talking about is 759B, which ultimately gets down to level of review. We've talked about two properties. There is 11 West Chapel and 294 Rock Hill Road, whereas this is on just off Sweeten Creek, really, just to the east. It is just shy of a mile south of the interstate. It is 9/10 of a mile south from the interstate. It is immediately across from the Sunset Cemetery and about a half mile west as the crow flies of the ballparks at the Robert Casilla Park. So here you can see exactly the properties we are talking about. There is 1088 Sweeten Creek Road, highlighted in purple, just off Sweeten Creek and West Chapel Road. That's not really for the discussion today. We have 11 West Chapel Road, which is the middle of those three properties, that is on West Chapel Road, and then you have 294 Rock Hill Road, which is currently addressed off Rock Hill because that is the street that you see there to the east. So this is where we are geographically. What I'd like to talk about is how we got here from the temporal standpoint. So last year, December 15th, we had what we call a TRC pre-application meeting. This is a requirement of the TRC. What happens is applicants come in and present their design to members of staff and members of the TRC to get design input prior to going to their neighborhood meeting, prior to applying for the TRC. Present representing 11 West Chapel were Mr. Clay Mooney and Michael Driscoll, the architect of Michael Driscoll Architects. What they were proposing was 21 townhomes and new right-of-way. Anytime you get a land subdivision with new right-of-way, that is a major subdivision, which is a level 2, that was provided in the pre-application notes that was provided to Mr. Mooney and Mr. Driscoll. Here you can see what was being proposed. That is the new right-of-way, which would just be off West Chapel Road with 21 units. Several months later, we received a pre-application meeting. This was something that is, well, it was early assistance, which is more akin to you can apply and you can receive information from staff about what would apply, how would this go, what needs to be done. It is for earlier stages of a development. Representing the applicants for Rock Hill Road were Clay Mooney and Gary Davis of Civil Solutions. This was 7 townhomes, and you can see here in this 4th bullet point what I had provided in those pre-application notes concerning the relationship to 11 West Chapel potentially being a larger plan of development. Here is the proposed drawing for 294 Rock Hill Road at that point. It is 7 townhomes. This would not be considered a major subdivision because it did not trigger new right-of-way and did not meet any number of land standards for that. Open space also wouldn't apply because it was 7 townhomes. So that was the review. There was some information provided there. Again, going back to the context map, here's where we are. So again, what you had just seen was 294 Rock Hill Road. The first one was 11 West Chapel in the middle, which shares a boundary. What is up for discussion today is 759B, and these are the conditions. So 11 West Chapel would have to have been a level 2 application regardless. The question is to 294 Rock Hill Road. The developments are located within 500 feet of each other. It was determined that they are. The application for the proposed development is received within 3 years of a certificate of occupancy, for a previous development. That hasn't been established yet, but they have not applied for either of them. That would likely be triggered based on what Mr. Mooney had told the city in terms of their timelines for development. And then, of course, number 2, which is really what brings us here, the proposed development and a previously approved development represent different phases of a larger plan that may or may not include shared parking facilities, access, and utilities or walls. So that's really what's at question, is what constitutes a larger plan or previously approved development. So that's something that the lawyers will talk about. That is more or less how we got here, is it started with one pre-application, December 15th, 11 West Chapel, very clearly a level 2. The other one, which came March, 294 Rock Hill Road, may have been a level 1, but staff made the determination that it would likely meet those 3 criteria, so it should be a level 2. I met with Mr. Edgerton and representatives from the applicants for this appeal. That's when we had a meeting here, 70 Court Plaza, to discuss what the assertion was from the city, and that's when it kicked off their 30-day appeal period. Obviously, they chose to appeal. That's what brings us here today.
Okay, there was a third thing of those 3, right? Which I don't think you mentioned.
Yes, I actually mentioned it first.
Oh, that's-
So, 500 feet with each other, 3 years of a certificate of occupancy for a previous development, and then the third one, which brings us here, which is previously approved development represents different phases of a larger plan.
Any questions for Mr. Starbaugh so far? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Ost, I have used presentation of witnesses and evidence by property owners.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. And I discussed briefly with Mr. Edgerton how you all wanted to do this, because I've got some questions I need to ask our witnesses. I also have some questions from Mr. Starbaum, and at the end of that. I can sit there next to Mr. Sneed, and Mr. Mooney can stand up here. Eric, how do do this? Let's let Clay be here. I'll be next to Mr. Sneed, and I'll have some exhibits too. I've got a flash drive with those exhibits on it. How can I get that installed?
For everyone involved, I don't know if it's my hearing or anything else, but if you could speak up, I would appreciate it, guys.
You can unplug this.
Yeah.
The microphone's ready.
Be right next to it. The microphones do work.
Okay.
I'll try to.
Yes. Speaking into the microphones at all times would be a solution.
I don't think I have any TikTok videos. Chambers of Peace exhibits.
Might take a second. It's a Chromebook.
That's it.
You want a full screen?
Yeah, and how do we toggle back? I've got 3 in here. To just scroll down.
You should just be able to click in between now,
Okay.
and then that will minimize that.
We'll do the best we can. Might need your help a little later.
That's all.
I think we're all set up here. It's, this room is not really organized for these kinds of appeals. Can you all hear me okay? Okay.
Just fine.
Thank you.
Okay. My name is Bob Ost. I'm with the local law firm here of McGuire, Wood and Bissett. Here with me also is Clay Mooney, a landscape architect who will be my chief witness, perhaps my only witness. Next to him is Dr. Bill Chambers, who's a local pediatric dentist who owns one of the parcels that we're talking about here today. This is, Mr. Starbaum said it was his first appeal. You said it was your first appeal in a long time. Mr. Sneed has confirmed all that. And it's my first appeal to the city of Asheville. We like the staff. Mr. Mooney and I make our business, make our living reading and applying development regulation and working with the staff. It's not in our interest to get crossways with them. But it is in the nature of what we do, which is applying land use regulations, that the disagreements arise. We try to work them out. When we can't work them out, then we have to get the Board of Adjustment involved. And that's kind of what happened here, as Mr. Starbaum pointed out. Mr. Mooney is the site planner for the projects on 2 adjacent properties. As Mr. Starbaum mentioned, he had a pre-application meeting with regard to the middle parcel there, which I've labeled as kinship on this exhibit. And then he attended an early assistance meeting with Mr. Starbaum on the other property known as, which is shown as Apex on that exhibit, and was advised following that meeting or at that meeting that the projects would be combined under the provision of the ordinance that was displayed a few moments ago. Because they were considered to be, we don't, they're right next to each other, they're certainly within 500 feet. They would likely be pulling permits within 3 years of each other. We don't quarrel with either one of those two requirements, but it is, it's the both of them being phases of a larger development that we do quarrel with, and I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. So we met with city staff, including Chris Collins, legal staff, including Mr. Edgerton and Mr. Starbaum, and we could not get it resolved, and so here we are. Now, the first rule of regulation and ordinance drafting is that you have to be precise. If you're going to draw a line, people have to know where it is. The people or activities being regulated have to know what's allowed and what's not. We think that this ordinance is vague. It says may or may not. We think it's vague, and so vague that we think that would not survive a court challenge, but we're not here to talk about that today. We don't want the board is not being asked to resolve that question. That's for a court to decide. Instead, we're asking you to consider the language of this code provision as it is written and apply it to the facts of this case. When you do, we think that you'll find the staff incorrectly determined on the basis of those items that they could look at that these projects should have been combined or they were different phases of a larger project. They're not. Or certainly it's not clear that they are. And that brings me to the second rule that I want to impress upon you all, and that is that zoning ordinances are in derogation of the common law right to property ownership, and ordinances, in the case of ambiguities, should be construed in favor of the free use of land. Again, we have no quarrel with the staff. We work with them every day. We tried to work this out, we just couldn't. So we're asking the Board of Adjustment to decide this and to do it in a way that preserves the ordinance but lets us proceed with our project. We think the facts and law lead to only one conclusion, that these projects are separate and should not be combined. Unless you all have any questions of me, I'll ask Mr. Mooney to come up and talk to us. I'm going to sit over there while he does that.
I'm not sure if this question is for you, but I'll ask it. What is the disadvantage to your clients of combining them?
I think it's probably best for Mr. Mooney to respond to that. He's the professional, and he's more intimately familiar with this than I am. So it's, if there are no further questions, I'll get Mr. Mooney up here to talk about that exact thing. According to Tyler, you can, I don't know how you toggle back and forth between these things.
Well, I just hit enter. We'll enter toggle it.
No, if you just click this arrow, then you can navigate between the exhibits. Then you can click that to collapse this
Gotcha.
And
menu.
I'm always prepared for the technology to fail, so I've got hard copies.
Understood.
Could you identify yourself for the record?
My name is Clay Mooney.
Thank you for asking the first question. Mr. Mooney, what do you do?
I'm a landscape architect, land planner.
And how long have you been practicing that?
I've been practicing 43 years, 41 years of those as a registered landscape architect.
And what does your work involve?
It involves site planning and site development work on various types of projects from residential to commercial, industrial, that sort of thing.
And is your work, how much of your work is in Asheville and Multnomah County?
Probably 95% now.
And I believe you said that you were a licensed landscape architect?
I am.
And have you received any special recognitions or certifications?
I have. I received a award from the North Carolina chapter of the American Society of Landscape Architects for residential design. I received an honor from the University of Georgia College of Environment and Design, the Dean's Honor Award. And I also was recognized as one of the Owens 50, which was also with the University of Georgia as one of the top 50 alums in the first 50 years of our program.
I take it from some of your responses that you went to the University of Georgia?
I did.
And have you ever been qualified as an expert witness in a court proceeding or a proceeding like this before a board before?
I have.
And what was the field in which you were qualified?
It was a landscape architect, land planning.
Mr. Chairman, at this time I'd like to offer Mr. Mooney as an expert in the field of landscape architecture and site design.
No objection.
Mr. Mooney, are you familiar with the property shown as Apex on Exhibit A1 that's displayed up here?
I am.
And how are you familiar with that?
I have worked on various conceptual site plans on all three of those properties up there through the years, actually dating back to 2019.
And how did you get involved with this property? Let me back up and ask, what happened with those other concepts and plans?
Well, originally, we were exploring a concept plan for the Kinship and Apex properties together for a office complex. It would be multiple buildings and so forth. And we even, that was going to necessitate a rezoning. And so we actually went through that process with an early assistance meeting. And anyway, it just turned out that the rezoning process was just going to be almost basically a non-starter. So it evolved that was developing a residential plan because we were instead of rezoning, we were going to basically what was allowed, permitted within the RS8 zoning. And so that morphed into a townhome type development.
Right.
And so that was what we had submitted and anyway started that process. And so that was what we were focused on at the time and preparing submittal documents for that. And then I received a phone call from a general contractor requesting me to explore a townhome development for the Apex project.
And so are townhomes permitted uses in the RS8 zoning classification?
They are.
And what else is permitted in the RS8 zoning classification?
Basically, that's permitted is single-family residential and townhomes. That's, I think, cottage developments, and I'm not exactly sure what that is, but.
So if you, why did you decide to build townhomes on the Apex property?
Well, the single-family residential option would only allow us 5 units. And that was governed by the 40-foot lot width, minimum lot required width. And so the townhomes afforded us to increase that density. So we could get 5, excuse me, I don't know if I said 4, we can get 5 single-family residential lots, but by going to the townhome, we could squeeze in 2 more units for a total of 7.
And I want to ask you the question the chairman asked me earlier. what's the consequence of, what's the reluctance to allow this, this Apex project to be considered, to be combined with the kinship project?
Well, really, it doesn't impact kinship at all. What it impacts with Apex is as a level 1, it basically was as we submitted in our early assistance meeting. If we have to go to a level 2, we will be required to have a sidewalk all across the frontage of both Rock Hill and West Chapel of the Apex property. Since there's no curb and gutter on Rock Hill or West Chapel, we would also have to add curb and gutter to that, which would then also increase the probability that we would have to have pipe storm drainage to pick up the drainage in the curb and gutter. So it was kind of a cascading effect of cost, and the goal of this development was to try to develop a lower price point townhome for either workforce or attainable housing. So that was the really the main impact of going to a level 2.
Was that the only reason you decided to develop these properties separately?
No, I mean, it was, each project is totally self-contained. The kinship has its own stormwater control system, separate entrances.
Let me stop you right there. If you wouldn't mind going to some of the site plans there, they help
Okay.
the board understand what you're talking about.
Okay. So this was the development plan. This is actually, we were about a week away from submitting this to the city of Asheville for a level 2 review when we had our early assistance meeting for Apex. And on this, you can see the units. There are 21 townhome units. It also shows the sanitary sewer lines, which are, that actually had to be relocated. There's a line that goes from the Sunset Cemetery that cuts across the corner. Our stormwater detention system necessitated the relocation of that line. And water is all internal. Again, this was a totally self-sufficient, and the intention was that Apex was going to be the same, that it would have its own water and sewer service as well as its own stormwater detention system.
And if it would help, I think that Apex is the next exhibit on there.
And so this is the 2 buildings comprising the 7 townhome units. Each one has its access off of Rock Hill Road. The gradient on Rock Hill Road is such that it's much more conducive for driveway connections. Also, you would have to have a separate road if we were to connect to West Chapel. Also, the grades, we have no requirements for retaining walls or anything. There's no dependency on Apex for anything on kinship.
And so, other than the fact that Apex and kinship are both town-owned projects, what common elements do they have?
None. They share nothing.
Now, with reference to the statute, to the ordinance, what we call the aggregating ordinance, do they have any shared utility connections?
I'm sorry, shared?
Do they have any shared utility connections?
No shared utilities.
Any shared walls?
No.
What about shared access or driveways?
None.
Are there any internal driveway connections or a walking path?
No.
Do they share any parking facilities?
No.
Do they have the same contractors or coordinated construction schedules?
No.
do they have any shared functional characteristics?
No shared functional characteristics at all.
Are kinship and apex different phases of a larger plan?
No.
And from a site design and land planning standpoint, are there reasons why these projects should not be combined, even if cost was not an issue?
It makes no sense from a land planning standpoint due to the topography. From Sweeten Creek Road up to Rock Hill Road, there's 61 feet of grade change. Actually, there's 43 feet of grade change just across the kinship. And so to make some internal connection would be actually creating grading issues that are unnecessary.
So I'll ask you then, based on your training and experience and your familiarity with the facts of this case, do you have an opinion as to whether these two projects, Kinship and Apex, are part of the same plan or different phases of the same plan?
Objection. This would go to the ultimate question of law that the board is here to decide, not the facts.
I think that Mr. Mooney is qualified to give his opinion on that ultimate issue.
Mr. Steve?
It's the board's call. Obviously, it is the questions you were to answer, and you have to keep in mind that it's just an opinion. Yes, qualifies as an expert. It's up to the chair to determine whether or not to hear his answer.
So I can answer?
Yes.
To me, there is no connection between these two.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have for Mr. Mooney at this time.
Mr. Steve, can we ask questions at this point?
Absolutely.
Okay. This may have been brought up, and I may have missed it, but is there one developer or two developers for these? Would you consider two projects?
There are two developers. There are two general contractors. Each project, Kinship and Apex, has its own general contractor and its own separate architect.
Okay, what about financing?
I'm sorry?
Financing?
I'm not aware of that. I believe that that would be separate.
But they're owned by the same person. The
No.
properties are owned by the same person.
No, they're not. There's a different LLC.
Are the LLCs owned by the same people?
No, as I understand it, one is Dr. Chambers and the other is Stephanie Chambers. They're separate LLCs. Excuse me?
Do Dr. Chambers and Stephanie Chambers have any relationship with each other?
They are familial relations, but separate LLCs, and again, the general contractor is working for Apex, is working for, she's also a dentist, Dr. Chambers, as well as the general contractor, Judd Builders, is working for Dr. Chambers on Kinship.
But we wouldn't be here today if it was me and a person I don't know developing property next to each other. We would not be forced to develop our projects together. So there's already been a determination, and y'all aren't really appealing the first one, which is proposed developments and are located within 500 feet of each other. That's assuming they have common ownership. So what we're here for is really the appeal of number 2, which is this part of phases of a larger plan and shared parking and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, common ownership is not one of the things that's listed in the ordinance that can be considered. And in fact, the zoning laws of North Carolina provide that the zoning regulates land use, not land ownership.
I guess my question is, again, I mean, obviously, these two developments are by the same people. They are being developed by the same people, whether it's the same LLC or not. We wouldn't be here if it was you, Bob, and me, Suzanne, developing 2 parcels. The city couldn't come to us and say, hey, Bob's doing this down, next to you. Y'all have to do it together.
I think that's true. I don't think it's any less true if the parties are related.
Yeah, perhaps Mr. Edgerton, if he hasn't thought of this question already, might address that. Paul?
Sure. Now, I think we'll get to it through the course of my cross-examination as well, so it may be best to hold, and then if there are any further questions from me, I'll be happy to answer those.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean now, I meant when it was.
Okay,
when you-
I don't want to jump in before
No,
the
no,
board
no.
finish with their questions of.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I may have.
I did have another question. Mr. Mooney, so you said that if you did the level 1 as a townhome development fronting off of Rock Hill Road, you'd have to put in curb and gutter and sidewalks, or you wouldn't have to put in curb and gutter and sidewalks?
If it was level 1, we would not have to.
Okay. And if it was a level 2, you would have to put in curb and gutter and sidewalks. Would you have to put in curb and gutter on a road that does not have curb and gutter?
Yes.
What about if there's no way for there to be stormwater infrastructure? I mean, there's currently a ditch line right there.
That
along
was
Rock Hill
a
Road.
direct question to Ken Putnam, and that was the curb and gutter is a requirement, even though there are examples in town that I see where curb and gutter is not in place, but it's a safety reason, and that was what Ken Putnam told me.
It was a safety reason? What's the safety?
The safety is to have at least, it's not a lot, but it's a 6-inch separation of a curb from the sidewalk. You have the curb and gutter, then you'd have a 5-foot landscaped area, and then a 5-foot sidewalk. So it's a vertical, the curb would act as some deterrent for a car leaving the road and careening onto the sidewalk. So it's a safety issue.
So that's sort of an argument in favor of curb and gutter.
Excuse me?
That's sort of an argument in favor of curb and gutter, right?
Well, it sort of goes with a sidewalk on a road that doesn't have curb and gutter. Now, if you are able to set the sidewalk further back, then, in fact, I've just had a project like that on Glenbridge Road, where we were able to have the sidewalk 14 feet off of the edge of the road outside of the DOT right-of-way, and so we were not required to have curb and gutter there. But here, because we're so constrained, then we would have to have that. We have to have it on Kinship, sidewalk and curb and gutter on the Kinship project.
It's probably not my place to dismiss you as a witness, so I'll let Mr. Rose go on.
We'll have our own
No,
questions as soon as the board is finished with theirs. We'll have a cross-examination as soon as the board is done with its questions.
I have a question. Did you ever draw a plan in your early phases, taking all 3 lots into account and using those all together?
Never looking at all 3 of them together. It was only the Kinship and the Apex. The lower property on Sweeten Creek Road is a brownfield site. It's a contaminated site, and so that's kind of its own total separate path. So we never looked at those together.
The 2 that are buildable, did you ever look at configuring those in a way that isn't representative of what we're seeing today?
Yes, we looked, that was early on, 2019-ish, we were looking at having 2 multi-story office buildings, 2-story office buildings on that. And what happened due to the grades, again, the gradient going up, over half of the Apex site just became a cut slope. And so it really wasn't adding value over the cost of that construction. And so that's why we then just pulled down and then just focused on the Kinship site for the 21-acre townhomes and that, and then looked at, and then when I got it, and that was where we were focused, and then got a call to develop this as 7 units accessing from Rock Hill.
Would there be any economy of scale to manage your stormwater if you were to develop these as one parcel, like with a common plan of development or something like that, to economy of scale for you to combine your stormwater management into one system?
Well, if you were looking at developing it as just one project, yes, but with it being two projects, that's how I was presented this, to develop kinship, and then later on it was with this. If you have two separate entities, two developments, there are different price points, there would be marketed different and different owners, then just the administrative headaches of combining stormwater into one, I think would outweigh any economies of that. And the distance travel, anyway, it just makes more sense to have it, for us to have it self-contained.
Did you ever get an answer back from Mr. Putnam in regards to any pushback on the curb and gutter and the sidewalk issue along Rock Hill Road?
I mean, it was a specific question, I believe, at the early assistance meeting. Because I did, that was the clarification that I needed, because that was a little bit of a surprise when the talk was to combine those. Because I've had instances before where we've had adjacent projects that were aggregated. And so, but that was also same ownership, and now they were both commercial. One was years ago, was the Lowe's on South Tunnel Road. So that was in the late 90s. We did that, and then when Lowe's moved, and we were developing what is the Best Buy and Bed Bath & Beyond, and we were developing that, we were required, because we were within the 3-year period, to connect those with the sidewalks all the way down South Tunnel Road. And so, but that, again, that was the same owner and all of that. That wasn't necessarily a point that we could argue. And then recently on Glenbridge Road, we had, it was the jumbo storage in Glenbridge, which was a storage, jumbo storage, but also a flex space development. They were also constructed within 3 years, and so we had to come in and show those together as part of our neighborhood meeting. But again, that was the same developer, and so again, no argument there. But this, with having the separate contractor, separate architects on both tracks, and then coming in totally kind of separate and behind it, and told that it's two, I mean, granted they may have familial commonality, but that, that could be anybody. I mean, to me, it's a separate LLC, separate owners, and just totally different projects in my mind.
Any other questions from the board?
Not right now.
Mr. Richards?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for coming back to City Hall, Mr. Mooney, and I'll try to be as quick as possible in my questioning. It's entirely possible that I'll ask you something that is based on things we talked about in that initial meeting.
Sure.
If I assume anything that is incorrect to the best of your knowledge, please just correct me. Don't accept any question that presumes something incorrect. But I'm going to start at the beginning of your testimony in response to Mr. Ost. And I believe you started at this original 2019 plan that included both what we're referring to as the Apex and the kinship properties. Do you recall being asked about that original 2019 plan?
I do.
And you stated that it was going to be commercial in nature, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, and there
It was office space.
Understood. And with this zoning designation, office space is not a by right use in this zoning area, is it?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Was a rezoning required in order to use it as?
Yes.
Okay. And again, correct me if I'm misremembering your words. I heard you say that that plan to get a rezoning for office space, it stopped because it was a, quote, non-starter. And that's a little bit different, saying that the rezoning was a non-starter than saying, well, we would have had more retaining walls or part of the site would be eaten up. Why was the rezoning a non-starter?
Well, part of that process, the rezoning process, was we were told that we would need to meet with the Shiloh community and present our plans to them and to try to gain their support for the development. And this was, we tried on numerous times. So we met with them, and they totally just did not like, totally unsupportive of the office development scheme. And so, I mean, we continued to try to modify things and to make things maybe more attractive to them, but it became very difficult. They were very reticent to even meet with us. It was difficult to get, now granted, in some of this, COVID even came along too. And so a lot of our meetings, I think we even tried to have some Zoom meetings, but there was absolutely no support, zero support for anything or any alternative other than a residential development on this property.
And those neighborhood meetings of the type you're describing, those are required for anything? Is it level 2 and above?
Any level 2 project, we have to have a neighborhood meeting.
All right. I think you've alluded to this since you said that COVID eventually became an issue, but do you know when that office plan was eventually abandoned, when you decided that the office plan was a non-starter?
I'm going to, I think the application meeting was 2022 for, I think that's the date, maybe Mr. Starbaugh could tell us when that earliest pre-application meeting was with Mike Driscoll. But so prior to that, we would have been doing some development. So I would say, I think that was March of 22. And so prior to that, we would have looked at that, so it would have been in 21. Now, I know that we even made the efforts to hire ex-mayor Terry Bellamy to be a liaison for this development with the Shiloh community, but again, that did not come to any fruition for any headway.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you specifically about the ultimate decision to abandon the office plan. Was that decision reached in a specific meeting that you can recall?
A specific meeting? No, not that I was part of. And again, that was, I was just saying, well, we're not, time had just been moving on and on and on, and it didn't seem like there was going to be any headway with Shiloh. And so they wanted residential, and so it seemed like instead of just butting our heads against the wall, that we would explore residential options that would satisfy some of their desires.
Okay. Before the office plan, were you going to be the site planner for that project when it was envisioned as an office development?
I was.
And when you were on board as the site planner for that office plan, who were you communicating with in order to get your marching orders on, yes, we're still going forward with an office plan, or we need to go back to the drawing board? Who were you in communication with?
At the time,
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to have to object to this line of questioning. Mr. Benny's testified that the commercial development, the required rezoning is no longer being pursued. What we're pursuing here is two projects that neither one of us will require rezoning. What happened in the past is irrelevant.
Mr. Chair, my response would be that to the extent the board is here to consider and decide whether what is currently before the board is a common plan of development or parts of a larger plan of development, it's relevant to know who had control of the previous iterations of the project. It's relevant to know who was on board. It's relevant to know why those fell apart, who had the ultimate decision-making authority with what was going to happen on these properties, at least as of 2019.
My feeling is that's why I like the quasi-judicial. I'm going to say the more information we have, the better for us.
So, Mr. Mooney, I'm gonna ask again, who were you working with back in 2019 in terms of getting your marching orders on whether you were still pursuing a office development on this site?
I answered to Carol Hughes. Carol Hughes is an architect in town.
Had you had any interaction with property owners?
Only through Carol Hughes. Carol Hughes is an architect, been in town since the mid to late 70s. Space Plan was his architectural firm. He has recently retired, anyway, he handled coordination for most of Dr. Chambers' projects that I was involved in.
Have you been involved in many projects with Dr. Chambers?
Several, yes.
And I guess I do need to be more clear. Which Dr. Chambers are you referring to?
I'm sorry, Dr. Bill Chambers.
Okay. And the other Dr. Chambers being,
Stephanie Chambers.
and that is Dr. Bill Chambers' daughter?
Correct.
Who is a member of his practice?
Of his practice, I'm not sure.
His practice.
I'm not sure. I know she's a dentist, but whether that is his, I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to move on to what we're talking about now, which is townhomes. Did I understand you correctly to say that you had initially looked at doing a townhome development on both lots? Is that correct?
No,
You never looked at having townhomes on both lots?
no.
When did the idea of townhomes first come up for you?
Again, that probably was in '21. That was during the period of time of trying to meet and work with the Shiloh community, and the efforts with Ms. Bellamy were not yielding any results. Then it was just the decision to try to do residential, and so we just focused on the kinship lot at that time. So that was in 2021, probably mid to late 2021.
And who were you working directly with the property owner at that point, or was there another intermediary like Mr. Hughes?
Mr. Hughes bowed out with when it became a residential development. He just prefers not to do residential development at this point in his career. And so at that point, I was dealing with Mike Driscoll, the architect on the project.
And just so we're clear, this is for the Apex property?
Mike Driscoll is the architect for the kinship project.
And who's the owner of that property, the kinship property?
I can't tell you the entity's name, but that's Dr. Bill Chambers.
And at this point in time, we've got what is presently before the board, townhome developments on both the Apex property and the kinship property. That's what's being proposed now, correct?
Yes, but in separate developments.
Yeah, we'll dig into that a little bit. This is where I'm going to try to make sure I don't ask you anything that I'm relying on past information. So I'll just ask it to you new. Is it likely that both sites are going to be under development at the same time?
I can't say that.
Have you ever been able to say that?
Probably, it's a little bit iffy. I mean, I guess that there exists at any time that, yes, one project may be finishing up as the other one gets started. But on this one, I don't know. I know that We have not even submitted our level 2 plans for kinship. We were, like I said, we were about a week away from submitting those when we had our pre-application or early assistance meeting for Apex. And so that kind of threw in some uncertainty, and so everything was put on hold.
Understood. And I'm going to follow up on a question that I believe you received from Ms. Gotsey on the board about grading and shared utilities, like stormwater utilities. I understand your testimony to be that there will be no shared stormwater features overlapping the two properties. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What permits are required to do pretty extensive grading and erosion control measures like you're going to have on these two properties? Is it just city permits, or do you have to get a permit through the state as well?
On Apex, I believe it would just be the city. I think there is a threshold above which you have to get a NGO, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the number, but it's from the state. It's basically some agreement that they concur with grading, and we have to provide them a copy of our approved permit. An NGO 1, am I close on that?
I'm not certain.
Okay, but anyway, but that's after it reaches a certain threshold.
Yeah. Have you ever evaluated the issue of whether DEQ would force you to just get one grading, sedimentation, and erosion control permit that would be applicable to both of the sites that we're talking about?
If I were looking at it as one development, I would have, but not in this case.
Well, setting aside whatever you subjectively mean by same development, let me just ask it this way. If those two properties were owned by different LLCs and had any developments going on at the same time on them, would you be able to get two separate permits from DEQ, or would you only be eligible for a single permit that would cover the whole site?
If it were separate owners, my understanding is you would be able to. Now, as I understand it, I think there was a comment from Nancy Watford at the pre-application meeting when all of this came up that basically said that the state would not provide separate permits for two projects adjacent to each other with the same ownership. And that was in her, I believe that was in the notes.
We'll come back to that. All right, sticking with grading. I realize that you're treating these as, in your mind, as two separate projects. Are there no longer any retaining walls needed to address the level of grade change that exists between the edge of one property to the other?
None. There is only one retaining wall proposed, and that was on the kinship, and that was just at the corner of one of the units to facilitate surface drainage around one of the units.
So I'm going to dig into the various things that, I'm sorry, before I move on, I'll just go ahead and ask you about this permitting issue with the state. Are you familiar with a section of the North Carolina Administrative Code, 15A NCAC 02H.1002, including subsection 8 thereof, defining common plan of development for purposes of DEQ?
Not by that number, I'm not sure I know that. If I read the substance, I might.
I'd be happy to. The section that I was just asking you about is common plan of development. It means a site where multiple separate and distinct development activities may be taking place at different times on different schedules, but governed by a single development plan regardless of ownership of the parcels. Information that may be used to determine a common plan of development includes plats, blueprints, marketing plans, contracts, building permits, public notices or hearings, zoning requests, and infrastructure development plans. Having heard that now, is it still your understanding that for purposes of DEQ permitting, ownership, as in one Dr. Chambers in one LLC, one Dr. Chambers in another LLC, that would have any bearing on how many permits you would be able to get from DEQ?
I'm going to ask you to repeat that question, please.
Sure. I think you had indicated that your understanding was that DEQ looks seemingly as a determinative factor to ownership. The section of the administrative code that I just read to you expressly says, regardless of ownership of the parcels. Is it still your understanding that DEQ looks to ownership of parcels as a determinative factor for how many grading and erosion control permits they'll issue?
I'll have to say I've not come up on that in the past. And so that would probably be something that I would have found out during this whole review process.
Okay.
And I think actually that was, again, Nancy Watford, Miss Watford was the one who, she mentioned that it didn't necessarily apply to ownership or the LLC or whatever.
Okay. I'm going to turn to the factors contained within the specific section of the city's code that the property owners are appealing from, the determination of whether this is part of a larger plan of development. You've seen that ordinance section put up before. But I'll go ahead and just hand you a copy, if that's all right, of the ordinance.
So, sure. And I have enough copies for the Board of Adjustment.
I think I do as well, which means kill some trees unnecessarily. But, put it back up on the. It's okay. That's okay. I think you've seen it. So again, I'll specifically call you to. It's section 7-5-9, subsection B, subsection C, and then we've got 1, 2, and 3 down there. 1 starts with the developments are located within 500
Yes.
feet of each other. 3, the application for the proposed development is received within 3 years of a certificate of occupancy for a previous development. And then 2, proposed development and a previously approved development represent different phases of a larger plan that may or may not include shared parking facilities, access, utilities, or walls. Do you recall being asked by Mr. Ost what your opinion was as to whether these 2 townhome developments on adjoining properties, whether they constitute different phases of a larger plan? Do you recall receiving that question from Mr. Ost?
Yes.
And in the lead up to your answer to that question, were you asked exclusively about the 4 items given as examples of what may or may not lead to the conclusion that they're different phases of a larger plan?
No, I'm sorry, say that again?
Yeah. Were you asked just about shared parking facilities, access, utilities, or walls, or did Mr. Ost ask you about other elements like having the same contractor? Do you recall him asking you about whether the contractors?
I'm sorry, I don't. I mean, he very well may have.
Okay. Do you remember him asking you about the functional characteristics of the 2 developments?
Yes.
Okay. Is that included in the subsection 759B C2?
Previous approved development represent different phases. And so you're asking me, and again, I'm sorry, I want to make sure I understand your question.
Absolutely. I'll rephrase it. So Mr. Ost asked you about, I believe, every single one of those 4.
Okay.
And then did he ask you about some other elements that might inform
And I'm sorry,
your
when you
opinion?
say 4,
Yeah, so I'll say 1 being shared parking facilities, 2 being access, 3 being utilities, and 4 being walls. Those are the 4 examples given
oh,
by
yes,
the ordinance.
okay. You're quoting from 2.
Yep.
Okay,
Do you remember Mr. Ost asking about
Yes.
those 4 elements?
yes.
Do you remember him asking about items that exceeded those 4 elements, like whether it was the same contractor, or whether they had, quote, functional characteristics that were the same.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Do those two things, like whether the contractors are the same or whether they share any functional characteristics, does that provide any basis for your opinion that these are not phases of a different, larger plan?
To me, they're not part of a phased plan because that's not how I approached them. I didn't approach them looking as them in total. I approached them as just kinship with 21 units, developing that, being self-contained, and then later on we were looking at Apex, having that as a separate project.
So moving beyond the issue of contractors or functional characteristics, I'm going to ask you about other things that these developments seem to share. One, I guess, and most obviously, would be geographic location. These properties are immediately next to each other, is that correct?
They share a common property line, yes.
They're owned by members of the same family.
Yes,
They're both proposed as townhome developments.
they are.
I guess the easiest one is they share a site planner.
They do.
And then the ones that we're less clear on, they may share a DEQ permit and they may share the same time frame in which they're being constructed. Is that all fair?
They might, yes.
And I think you've talked about the motivation for separating them, just to hone it to a fine point. Do you know what the cost of adding storm and gutter or sidewalks would be for the Apex property?
Based on the city's fee in lieu of, because you're going to get contractors or whatever, but based on a fee in lieu of, a 5-foot sidewalk is $50 per lineal foot, curb and gutter is $25 per lineal foot. And I think I've tallied that's close to $360, $370. So we're talking close to $25,000 just for those two line items. And then the paving repairs that would be necessitated by the installation of curb and gutter, anyway, and storm drainage. So, you know, I could give you an educated guess that we're probably talking $40,000 or so. That's just a guess. The only things I know are curb and gutter and sidewalk based on the fee in lieu that the city charges. And again, that just seems like something that the development trying to have a lower price point and having, the city wants affordable housing, and so everything that you add to it makes it less. And so that's kind of why it may seem insignificant, but when you're trying to meet a specific price point that the city wants, every little bit impacts.
Could you mention the sewer? I'm not sure I understand what that means, but I'll ask you the question.
And I'm sorry.
Sewer? I think you were asked about sewer by members.
I was, yes.
Okay. What about the sewer on this project?
This property currently doesn't have sewer. Was an existing mobile home, single mobile home, and it had a septic field. And so a sewer line is going to have to be constructed to tie into the MSD line that's on West Chapel.
Okay, I'm gonna have to ask you to orient me to that. Where is the sewer line going to run? And can you show that on the current site plan, or I guess maybe the other?
It'll be easier to show on this.
Okay.
Here, let's see if this will work.
Fortunately, they typically don't. Yours might be better than, no. Sorry.
Nope, I'm not. Anyway, There is those two dots, those are proposed manholes that would be constructed to then run down West Chapel.
Excuse me, what two, I can't,
Okay.
two dots you're talking
You
about?
got some,
You can see the cursor.
okay, you good? So these two manholes here would be what would collect the sewer from Apex running in West Chapel down to a connection point with a sewer line. This is the existing sewer line that comes under the cemetery. And so that is the connection point for Apex, right there, after it traverses down West Chapel. Okay?
Okay. So I'm pausing because it sounds very much like you just described to me that a common utility is going to be installed to serve both of the properties, which I assume can't be the case, otherwise surely we wouldn't be here today.
That's right, that's not a common sewer. It is a public sewer. From this, I would say from this point on, the project is developing a public sewer to connect to West Chapel.
Which project is developing?
This is Apex, is developing this right here. Okay? To that point there. This sewer line presently, right now, runs diagonally across here, across the corner of the Kinship property. Okay? Kinship's not constructed, that's where Apex ends. That's Apex sewer ends. All right? Kinship, due to this stormwater detention system, which is over where this MSD line currently runs through here, sort of like that, their sewer line starts here, runs down the center of the road, down through here, and then would turn and go and connect there. Okay?
Yeah.
Also, since this stormwater detention requires the relocation of that sewer line, Kinship would pick up with this manhole and then run down through here and connect to this. Okay? And it would come, and again, this is two separate projects, and so they could, the sewer would function independently if either one of these was not constructed. Okay?
So I'm going to refer to the sanitary sewer because we've got storm sewers and sanitary sewers. Am I correct that you're saying?
Just go stormwater, just call it that.
Sure. For Apex, the sewer line that you're talking about being constructed on what looks to be the property line of the Kinship property.
It's actually in the right-of-way of
Okay.
DOT.
Okay, so it is just off of
It is not
the
in,
Kinship.
that's right.
So Apex is going to run a sanitary sewer line in the right-of-way just off of the Kinship property to join an access point where you currently have the maps.
Correct.
Matt?
That is a new manhole that would be connected to the existing sanitary sewer line
So
that comes from Sunset Cemetery.
So the Apex sewer is going to connect to the same sewer line that needs to be relocated, a portion of which, not the portion that Apex is connecting to, but it's a portion of the same sewer line that has to be removed in order to facilitate the Kinship project. Is that correct? Okay.
This is the connection point of Apex to the existing sewer. This section right here would still be public sewer, the existing sewer. That section is not being removed. It is only from that manhole down this way that the line is being relocated. And again, that is to take all of the area that's off-site, above Sunset Cemetery, all back in that area, that has to be routed around the stormwater detention system to get back into MSD's line.
Okay, so those black rectangles is what I'll call them, the dotted line that runs along West Chapel Road. That's going to be one entire sanitary sewer line that will be constructed in the course of both of these projects.
Yes. I mean, if Apex goes, this section right here gets constructed.
Okay.
If Kinship doesn't go, that line still runs in its current location. If Kinship goes, then it will be serviced by this line, again, totally independent, and it connects this way. Plus, it would be responsible to provide, to continue the service through Sunset Cemetery around. It has to maintain that connection. And there is a small section between that manhole and that manhole that is the existing MSD line,
Which will remain.
which will remain.
I think I'm clear on it. I'm gonna try to summarize and tell me if I've gotten anything wrong.
Okay?
Orient me first. North is up on this map?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Okay. So the section of sewer line that is to plan east on West Chapel Road, that will be constructed by the developer of
Apex,
the furthest east property.
right?
Okay? And then that same sewer line that continues on will be constructed by the developer for Kinship, assuming
Correct.
it moves forward.
Right?
And then, because they've continued that sewer line on through West Chapel, they'll then be able to remove the existing sewer line that bisects Sunset Cemetery and a portion of the Kinship lot.
Yes, the corner through here, yes.
And that line that bisects the Kinship lot and Sunset Cemetery is where you're going to connect the sanitary sewer for the Apex property.
I'm sorry, say that.
The Apex property is connecting to that existing sewer line.
The Apex is connecting to the existing sewer line at that point.
Right. So that's all just building up. I just want to make sure that I understand the total scope of things that are being done to this same existing sewer line, as, I guess, separately and apart by these two different projects. To ask this question, are you going to have one contractor do all of this work, or are you going to have separate contractors doing this different work to an MSD line?
And that depends upon the projects. From a design standpoint, and we sort of looked at it from total through here, but in other words, having a look to make sure that independently, if Apex went and none of these other projects went, that it would still function. If Kinship went and Apex didn't, that everything would, would work.
I understand that.
So whether or not that would be all one contractor, I don't know. I mean,
I think you can see the reason I'm asking. Let's just assume the hypothetical that Apex and Kinship are both going to be developed, and you are going to be disrupting an existing MSD line to move it off of the Kinship property, and you're going to be building a new section of line to service the Apex property. You'll be doing a lot to an existing MSD line and connecting to it and replacing some of it. Would it make sense for you to have two contractors do different segments of that?
I'm going to object. That whole question is based on speculation, and I don't think it's appropriate.
Fortunately, Mr. Moody's been qualified as an expert, which allows him some degree of leeway to speculate as to, and to offer opinions about hypotheticals. So I would ask that he be allowed to answer the question.
I'm going to allow it.
So again, the hypothetical I've suggested is that both projects are moving forward. You're going to have a line coming off of Apex to connect to the existing MSD line. You're going to have a portion of that same MSD line dug up and replaced to put it within West Chapel Road and not bisect your property. in your experience as a site planner, does it make sense to have multiple different subcontractors do separate sections of all that work to one MSD line?
Simplicity is always better, but that's not always how things are chosen to do. So while would it make sense? It would, but unfortunately I can tell you a lot of things that are done that don't make any sense at all.
All right, thank you, Mr. Moody. I believe those are all my questions at this
Okay.
time.
Any other questions from anybody?
Any other questions from the board?
The only other question I had is doing all of that sewer improvement in the roadways of both West Chapel and, it still looks like West Chapel to me, but whatever the roads are called up there, but.
Rock Hill.
Rock Hill and then across the street where you're connecting. I think it's safe to assume the city of Asheville is going to require you to do paving and pavement patching along both of those roads. Is that going to be something that you're going to tie in together as all one, like have one paving contractor to do all of that work?
I don't know. Again, it would make sense. Part of that would be in a timeline situation.
That's the only other question I had, thanks.
May I ask one or two follow-up questions to clarify some things?
I don't have to give permission, he's allowed to.
So, Mr. Mooney, is each of these projects, assuming they're both built, going to have separate sewer connections, is that correct?
They will have different tie-in points to a public sewer.
And they are both townhome developments, but what does RS8 allow you to do under the zone?
Single-family residential and townhomes and whatever a cottage development is.
So it's not like you have a range of choices to.
No.
And even if one project moves ahead and the other one does not, and that you can interchange them, they would have to install the sewer systems that are planned here, is that correct?
Yes. There is no public sewer service to the Apex property. So to be constructed, it has to construct its own public sewer connection to the existing MSD line.
And is any element of the Apex, the sewer system that we require by Apex, would there be any easements required from Kinship in order to install that sewer system?
I don't believe so, because it's being constructed within the DOT right-of-way.
And is there anywhere in this ordinance that you're aware of that addresses ownership of contractors?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean,
That's all I have, thank
Mr. Ellis, do you have any other witnesses?
let me check with Dr. Chambers real quick.
I'm sorry?
May I request?
Sure, how Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break.
I'm going with you.
Sewer talk.
Yeah.
Sidewalks, curb and gutter, we're talking about there are, we have some quantity and we have areas we have modifications to say that that is a level to do this. I think we're seeing that now. Right. Yeah. But still, it's I figured that was coming from one or both of you. So. It's like a telephone game where someone gesticulates wildly to me, and then I'm like, yeah. I didn't say that like I don't want to put that on you or think that that's more current thing. Yeah. I know. This is actually the one meeting, like years I don't have my laptop there with me, which is just like a junk drawer of and all of that. Of course, that would be the one meeting. Oh, we can turn it up.
Yeah.
This is the time of the year where it rains and you have to adjust it, and then it's going to get hot again in 20 minutes. Oh, no worries. Well,
Okay, so that
yeah, no. I had to ask Eric when he was talking to Clay if I could go too, so. Wow.
I just love that, like, Eric's the one handing out bathroom passes.
Literally not.
Dork.
Do you want me to do that? Let's move.
The other request was, could you please give me a review on Rover? Doesn't have to be long.
Her broke best friend is in Europe, also known as the daughter. So
She's texting me. She's like, I have $50 in my account. I know what's going on. I was like, because you overdrafted the other account. It requires a $50 balance. I'm like,
Wait till you get a house. I have the same thing. My paycheck Friday, Saturday morning, the loans and it's gone.
otherwise known as the black hole.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, bless her, but.
He's asked that I switch over back to my presentation. Do you have any objection to that?
No, that was still acceptable.
Yeah, I'll just minimize that. Perfect.
Okay, we have everybody back, is that correct? Okay, we're back in session. Okay, so Mr. Rose, do you have another,
I have no further witnesses, thank you.
okay. Mr. Richardson?
Yes. We'll call Dr. William Chambers first.
Okay.
Yes, I've been an expert witness in dental cases, but not this.
Thank you, Dr. Chambers.
Thank you.
And that might be relevant if I ever go back into private practice.
Okay.
But you heard the testimony of Mr. Moody, is that
Sure.
correct? All right. I'm just going to ask you about the ownership of these two lots. I wasn't clear on which property you own. Can you clarify that for me? Which of these two properties do you own?
So the West Chapel Road or Kinship Homes property is the one that's owned by the LLC that I'm the member of.
Okay. And that would be the Summit Townhome LLC?
That is correct. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Was that LLC, Summit Townhome LLC, organized on June 14th, 2022?
I believe it was, yes, sir.
Yeah, was
I'll have to
that,
ask my attorney for sure, but
was that organized by I think this is probably your attorney, Daniel J. Berry?
yes, that was done with my accountant, and it was revised by my attorney later.
And then, who is the owner of the 294 Rock Hill Road property?
That is Apex Family Homes, and the members of that are Courtney Mooney and Stephanie Chambers.
All right, and then, so for Apex Family Homes LLC, was that LLC also created on June 14th, 2022?
I assume it was, but it was amended later, yes.
Okay. Was it also organized by Daniel J. Berry?
I believe it was, yes, because we have the same accountant.
Okay. So the LLC ownership for both of these parcels, those LLCs came into existence on the same date and were created by the same organizer?
For different people, yes.
Do you own any interest in 294 Rock Hill Road?
I do not.
What about the time of acquisition? When were these two parcels acquired, if you know?
As far as the ownership, I believe the transactions occurred on the same date. They were under contract for several years with the Craigs. And so I gave up my interest in the property because I was developing it for potential office structures, but it was going nowhere. So basically, I saw the writing on the wall, gave up my interest, and that's when I pursued it differently. And the other LLC pursued their interest in this differently. There was a mobile home on that property at the time of Apex when it was purchased, where the other was vacant land.
Okay, and the closing date, which I think I understood you to have been the same for both 11 West Chapel and 294 Rock Hill. Who acquired those properties at that time? Was it initially those two separate LLCs?
Yes, it's always been those two LLCs separately.
Did you have two separate closings
Yes, there were two separate closings.
on the same date?
I'm not sure what the date was because some of these people had to do signatures out of town, so they were probably a day or two apart, but they, there were different people.
Okay, I think those are all the questions that I have. Thank you.
Bob?
Dr. Chambers, you heard Mr. Moody's testimony.
Right.
Is there, in your mind, are these projects separate projects?
They're totally separate projects. And there's a lot of reasons why, first of all, kinship, which is Summit, is something that we started to look at after we purchased the property, and we wanted to utilize. One of my goals is to provide housing for folks in town. One of the hard things in Asheville is to try to get obtainable, affordable housing. And so on kinship, the reason we tried to do townhomes is we could develop something and get a lot more utilization for property. And we have no problem going through a level 2 rezoning on that or approval process. I'm not here to defend kinship because I don't have any interest in kinship. I just know the challenges that they have with that property is they don't have city water, or they don't have city sewer provided to them, so that entity's got to put its own sewer in. If it goes to level 2, you've got to provide sidewalks, curb gutter, all the entities, and the way the land lies, that's not going to be an easy process.
You said kinship.
I'm sorry, Apex.
Thank you.
Apex would have to do all that sort of stuff, and it drives the cost up for that project tremendously. If you're trying to do obtainable, affordable housing, to conjoin these two properties as twins when they have no commonality as far as the LLCs are different, everything is different on these two projects, and to combine them into two, only based on the fact if they're on the same developmental timeline, and you can't determine that because we don't know what the timeline is going to be on these things. So if they were 3 years apart or they didn't have a common landscape architect, this wouldn't even be a discussion. I think it all sort of sent a red flag up when there was a common red flag for the architect, landscape architect. Otherwise, if there were 2 different landscape architects, then this probably wouldn't have been an issue. If there were 2 different timelines for development, this wouldn't be an issue. So this is really more of an administrative thing. And I hate to drag your whole afternoon out when it's so pretty out to do this, but I appreciate what y'all do in trying to sit down and do this. I'm glad I didn't put the thing too close to property line or something. We had to deconstruct something, but again, it's more of an administrative staff disagreement. And we've tried to work this out with them. It's just come down to we've got a third party to look at it. And from the legal standpoint, Bob can address that. There's what the zoning regulation is. But I appreciate the staff. I've worked with them on other projects and appreciate y'all's time and effort that you spend to listen to the stuff in the Board of Adjustments.
I don't have any more questions.
Anybody got a question for me?
Dr. James,
I'll have just one more. I think
Sure.
it would be best to go ahead and put a document into evidence that describes the testimony you just gave about the formation of these LLCs. If I gave you the articles of incorporation for those 2 documents, would you be able to recognize them?
Maybe not.
Maybe if your context clues.
I have to put my glasses on.
Bob, for the sake of clarity, I'm going to assume that you wanted your exhibits offered into evidence and included in the record, or?
Yeah, I've got exhibits A1, A2, and A3, and also the certified copies of the ordinances there, 2 of them.
Okay.
Now, you know, those have been amended, right? That those.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And so I'm going to approach you with what I've got tentatively marked as Exhibit B and Exhibit C, and I'll get a cleaner copy from court reporter. Do you recognize those documents?
Summertown Apex. Those look familiar. But they're not signed or.
Do you have any, do you believe that do you recognize the signature on the second page of each? Okay. And Mr. Berry is the individual who organized these 2 LLCs?
He did it through the accountant, yes.
Okay. Do these appear to be correct copies of the articles of organization for Apex Family Homes LLC, Summit Townhomes LLC, as they were initially created on June 14, 2022?
Probably.
Okay. this time, move to admit what I would mark as Exhibit B, which is the Articles of Organization for Apex Family Homes LLC, and Exhibit C, the Articles of Organization for Summit Townhomes LLC into evidence.
No objection.
Thank you, Dr. Chambers. That is now officially.
Okay. Any questions?
I don't believe so. Thank you.
I believe I have enough copies for everyone to take one. Mr. Chair, our next witness that we would call is Mr. Starbaum.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Starbaum. Could you please reintroduce yourself to the board?
Yeah, third time's a charm. Sam Starbaum, certified planner with the City of Asheville. My official title is Planner 2, and I work for Development Services at 161 South Charlotte Street.
Could you please just give a quick background of your educational history leading you up to the point of being Planner 2 with the City of Asheville?
Yeah, absolutely. So I attained my degrees in undergraduate from Colorado State University. That is a Bachelor's of Science in Political Science, and then also a degree in Spanish. Immediately upon graduation, I went to the University of Colorado, where I received a Master's of Urban and Regional Planning and also got my first job in community development. That was 2013 with the Colorado Center of Community Development. So this marks 10 years in planning, 8 years of municipal governance. After graduating from the University of Colorado, I worked for the City of Omaha, and then I was back in Southwest Colorado, where my family is from, in the town of Mountain Village. And then I met my wife, who is from Asheville, and that prompted us to move out here a week before the pandemic. Don't recommend. And I've been with the City of Asheville for 2 years, going on 3 now, I believe.
And in those 10 years of work experience, it sounds like you may have been called upon to interpret ordinance sections of city code in the past.
Correct.
Before we reconvened from the break, I asked you to put up a snapshot of section 7-5-9B of the city code, which is what we're here to discuss. Is that what's shown on the screen, a true and accurate copy of that ordinance?
To the best of my ability to recall, yes.
And so I'm going to call your attention to the subsection that I think everyone at this point agrees is really the only thing we're here to discuss, which is subsection BC2, which reads, the proposed development and a previously approved development represent different phases of a larger plan that may or may not include shared parking facilities, access, utilities, or walls. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Is there a specific definition in city code for the term different phases of a larger plan?
There are not.
So there is not some specific definition of what that means that we can go look to and see.
There is not.
All right, then I'm going to continue on from the words different phases of a larger plan that may or may not include shared parking facilities, access, utilities, or walls. In the context of interpreting ordinances, typically when you see this sort of may include language, is that supposed to be an exclusive list of the only things that you should consider when interpreting the ordinance?
No, and that's what brings us here, is I regard that as being open-ended and not definitive. It's akin to including but not limited to.
So it may be those things, but it may not be those things that leads you to the conclusion that a project is different phases of a larger plan of development.
There could be others, yes, to constitute the larger plan of development.
Having heard the testimony from Mr. Mooney predominantly today, we've gotten a good bit of information for the board on what these, the development on these 2 parcels is to look like. What of that information leads you to conclude that they are different phases of a larger plan, the townhome developments on these 2 sites next to each other?
It's actually not one thing, it's what I believe you call in the legal profession a preponderance of evidence. There are a number of things. You know, it starts with the March pre-application we had with Mr. Mooney concerning Rock Hill Road, which is Apex. That's when both Dr. Bill Chambers and Dr. Stephanie Chambers were mentioned and as having some familiar relations. It was looking at the sanitary sewer as described. If it is a level 2, 11 West Chapel will require sidewalk, which goes to the property. There are also some questions to what constitutes a common plan of development for grading permits. And again, I would defer to Nancy for that, but there are any number of things that made us come to the conclusion that it is part of a larger development.
All right. Thank you for that. I'm going to stick with the sidewalks and curb and gutter aspect of this.
Yeah.
Do you, when interpreting an ordinance, consider the motivations of a property developer in deciding how you're going to interpret that ordinance?
No.
So if somebody wanted to save money by avoiding the installation of curb and gutter and sidewalk for a wholly benevolent purpose, for creating affordable housing, does that intent factor into your interpretation of the actual ordinance sections?
No.
Would the desire to avoid incurring the cost of sidewalks or curb and gutter serve as a basis upon which a developer would be excused from complying with aspects of the city's UDO?
No, there are ways in which they are not required though, and there's also, we could be here all night because affordable housing is a different thing, and there are other incentives and things provided by planning and urban design and community and economic development that I can't speak to because I am certainly not a recognized expert in those subdisciplines.
Okay, understood. So taking into consideration all of the factors that you feel you are allowed and able to properly consider when determining whether this is a larger, phases of a larger plan, what is your conclusion on that? I think it's clear from the fact that we're here, but just to make it explicit, what's your conclusion about whether the development of the Apex site and the Kinship site are different phases of a larger plan?
These are unequivocally phases of a larger plan of development owing to a number of factors that include, but are not limited to, ownership, sanitary sewer, sidewalks, curb, gutter, and landscape architect and registered LLCs through the North Carolina Secretary of State.
Okay, just as a final matter, I would move, having had the opportunity to go through Mr. Starbaum's educational history and work history, I would move that he be qualified as an expert in the field of urban planning.
I have no objection.
Technically, Mr. Ost gets to weigh in too. Okay. All right, Mr. Starbaum, those are all of my questions.
Thank you.
I believe you described the, I'm sorry, I'm Bob Ost, I'm the attorney for Mr. Chambers. You and I have met before.
Yeah, I recall.
Would you describe again the factors that caused you to consider this being different phases of the same project?
Yeah, to the best of my ability to recall, and again, there may be others, I would have to go through the documentation. The LLCs, the ownership, the fact that Mr. Mooney is part of them both, the element of sanitary sewer being tied to the same system, and as Clay had talked about, having to extend that through West Chapel immediately along or adjacent to the property line.
And so, where in this ordinance does it say that you can't have commonality of ownership?
It does not in this ordinance specifically.
And well, let me back up a little bit. Can you explain to the board what you think the purpose of this ordinance is? The one that requires the combination of projects.
I will try and be as succinct as possible. So in the city, we have 3 levels of review. There's level 1, level 2, level 3. Level 1 is done at the administrative level There are certain conditions for that which you can look at the UDO, but it's usually done by development review specialists, planner ones, and has a much quicker turnaround time. The level 2s is sort of my bread and butter as it turns out. So that's usually technical review committee level reviews, which would include, but is not limited to, major subdivisions, residential units, 20 to 49, certain amounts of commercial space, which I believe are in excess of 100,000 off the top of my head. So generally larger projects which have other triggers for design and development, and again, they also require neighborhood meetings and are typically a longer review process.
So,
Well, oh, sorry, I wanted to answer the question if I may, Mr. Rose. So the purpose behind this is if these 3 sufficient conditions are met, it is clear that it will impact the urban design or the urban fabric of this particular area for a given time, again, 500 feet, 3 years. So because these are being met, it's going to require that more rigorous standard of review. So that's the purpose.
so just going through the list in section 2 there, do these projects share any common utilities?
No.
What about shared walls?
No.
Any shared access points?
No, but this is all hard to say because neither have submitted officially.
Any internal connections such as driveways or walkways?
Nothing for driveways. I recall in both the 1215 meeting for the TRC pre-app and then also for the 315 early assistance for Rock Hill Road is some discussion of retaining walls. It is steep there. There may have to be some sort of backfill. We were waiting for engineering on that, but never received anything.
Do they share any parking facilities?
No.
Okay. So the things they have in common are they got the same landscape architect, and there's some overlap, shall we say, between the LLCs that own these properties.
There is correct, there is overlap, but that is not the only thing that they share, because there is that tie into the public sewer system.
But isn't it true that each project would have to provide its own sewer connection if it was built separately?
That is true, yes.
So if let's say that these properties were owned by 2 LLCs that had no relation, as Ms. Gotzi said earlier, if she owned one parcel out of the other, does your answer change?
It probably wouldn't, owing to the fact that we still need more information for retaining walls. There is some element of sanitary sewer here, and again, I really wish Nancy were here. She just got back from Italy and is recovering from COVID, but could speak more to what is required from an NCDEQ. But there are possible reasons why individuals that are completely unrelated under separate ownership would still be triggered for a level 2 review under 759B2C.
But the only factors mentioned in this ordinance in section 2 there are shared parking facilities, access utilities, or walls.
That is correct as it is written, but and this is where we plumb disagree is what this hinges on, and what led to the staff decision to the appeal is may or may not, and is that open-ended or not.
Well, that sort of brings me to a question: is how is a developer or developer supposed to know?
Pre-application meetings.
But reading the ordinance, how are they supposed to know?
Well, we have a planner of the day on staff which provides administrative clarification. You can seek out answers to planners well in advance before you get to design.
So they have to come to you. They couldn't read this code and figure out for themselves that some element of common ownership would be a problem for them.
To an extent. They could seek us for guidance, or they can reach out to any number of design professionals to get clarity on that as well.
And so you I apologize for asking this question in what may be a repetitive manner, but so they would have to come to you in order to get clarification on
They could email or call, but yes, they would have to reach the planning department or development services department.
Okay. Let's say someone wanted to avoid the requirements of the level 2 process on the Apex property.
Mhm.
Could they design a project in such a way that would do that?
I would think that they certainly could. Of course, the easiest way to do it would be less to do with design and just to wait longer than 3 years from a certificate of occupancy as outlined by number 3. So you can get around that for a level 1, but the best way to do that would be to wait 3 years.
And what kind of uses can you make a property that's zoned RSA? Uses permitted by right?
Yeah, Mr. Mooney was right. It's going to be nearly exclusively single-family residences or townhomes or cottage developments,
Okay,
which I've never seen an application for either.
So that's really more a function of the code and restrictions of the code than it is any common plan, right?
In terms of use, yes, but the zone has nothing to do with this particular section. I've applied this in commercial and industrial and residential as well. You can have larger phases of commercial developments, larger phases of industrial developments, larger phases of residential developments.
And I believe that's all my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ost.
I may have one or two more, just one second.
Yep, totally.
Okay, so you were, I'm going to try to go back to different aspects of what you were just testifying about. You had, you were asked, I believe I got this right, whether you could do a townhome development on the Apex property without triggering level 2 requirements. Is that correct?
Correct.
Remember that question? Okay.
Yes.
So would level 2 requirements be required if this property was owned and shared no development plans in common with the neighboring property? So Joe Schmo or Adam Smith owns this property, nothing else, and they wanted to develop 7 townhomes on it. Would they be subject to level 2 requirements?
They may, again, if there were other shared aspects, but just as a use by right, probably not.
It's not the townhome aspect of it that is triggering this level 2 issue that is being sought to be avoided. It's the commonality of the plan next to it.
Yeah. And again, to reiterate, this section is applied to all types of developments, and we've seen level 2s in commercial, highway business, and commercial industrial. Any of the form codes have also been then raised to a level 2 for all 3 of these reasons.
Okay. Do you recall, it may have been in Mr. Ost's opening argument, a statement of zoning can't regulate ownership, it can only regulate use. Do you recall hearing that?
Yeah.
If you assume that all 3 of these subsections, 7, 5, 9, B, C, 1, 2, and 3, if all 3 of those are met, do the permitted uses in RMA? Is that what
RSA.
RSA, do the permitted uses change?
No.
So there's nothing in this section that we're here to talk about that changes the permitted uses based on ownership.
No, this is entirely to do with level of review and nothing to do with use.
believe those are my only two clarifying questions. Thank you.
Any questions from the board?
I have a couple questions. What is the acreage of each one of those parcels?
I can't tell you off the top of my head. That's something I would have to look at Map Asheville for.
I'm trying to look it up. I am having the hardest time finding this piece of property. Every time I get on here, these roads are not the same.
So Apex is 1.98, or excuse me, that would be kinship. I think it's been referred to. I have it pulled up. And Apex is 0.76.
So based off of that, if Apex is developed by itself alone, it doesn't have to come into compliance with some of the more stringent open space requirements that we have. Is that correct?
No, open space, tree canopy, and other requirements out of 711-1 are based on number of units. So because this is 7, if it were 8 units, it would have to comply with open space.
Gotcha. And so it's non-residential that's based off of acreage.
Right.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you, Mr. Sturba. Mr. Oates, do we have closing arguments?
Just came up here to do it. First of all, while I'm thinking about it, let me provide these exhibits, A1, A2, and A3. You already have A4 and A5, certified copies of the ordinances. Thank you, members of the board. We've been here for a long afternoon, and I appreciate your patience and indulgence. You've heard the evidence consisting of testimony and exhibits, and we think they show affirmatively that these projects don't share anything that would justify combining them, even under the city's broad reading of the code. They have not, they share no functional characteristics, not one. No shared driveways, no shared access, no shared walls, no utilities, no shared parking facilities. And the fact that they happen to be a similar form of development is more a function of the zoning code than any plan than any shared plan. The staff has pointed to such things as they have the same designer, that they're overlapping LLCs that the owners are related, and that there may be some similarity in the timelines, although even that was speculative. None of these are things that the city can regulate or should regulate, and there is case law in North Carolina that says that zoning cannot be used to regulate ownership; it can only be used to regulate the use of land. Mr. Edgerton asked a question that suggested that is not what was happening, but I would suggest to you that that's the exact opposite. Because what is the effect of that is that if the commonality of ownership is one of the factors that's driving this decision, then ownership actually it actually is part of what the city is regulating. So these are not different phases of the same project. Nothing suggests that. These are situations where it makes sense. There are situations where it makes sense to apply this provision. This is not one of those situations. You heard Mr. Mooney testify about the Lowe's project down on South Tunnel Road. It made sense there, but in this case it does not. Again, we like the staff. We appreciate their work. This is just a situation where we disagree. We do not think that these projects were properly combined. They're separate projects, not different phases of the same project. There are some commonalities, but these commonalities are more coincidental than anything else. And we would ask you to essentially well, I don't want to say overrule the staff, that sounds bad, but just we think the staff's determination list was incorrect, and it is difficult to read this ordinance and know how to apply it without going to the staff, which leaves these determinations in the hands of the staff and not determinable by looking at the ordinance. And we'd ask that you agree with our appeal and allow us to proceed without going through level 2. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Would it be correct for me to say that a one-sentence summation of the reason we're here is that you believe that city staff erred in ruling that these were a combined development?
Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone on the board? Closing arguments from Mr. Edgerton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll echo what Mr. Rose has said a few times now. There's no animosity between the parties. I'll go a step further and tell you affirmatively that regardless of your decision, there's no animosity or hurt feelings about whatever that decision would be. The crux of why we're here is this ordinance section that we've been talking about for a few hours now. And I think it specifically comes down to whether or not you read that section of the ordinance to be an exclusive list of factors that staff is allowed to consider in determining what is or is not phases of a larger plan. So that subsection says that you view two developments on two different sites as one development and treat them as one development for review purposes if they are phases of a larger plan. And what follows is 4 examples of what things might be considered, but that list of things that might be considered begins with the words may or may not include, which is why I believe that Mr. Starbaum has correctly concluded that it's not an exclusive list, that you can't start an exclusive list with the words may or may not include if you intended it to be exclusive. So assuming the board accepts that threshold premise, we're then to the question of whether the evidence suggests that these are different phases of a larger plan. Evidence in that regard that you have heard includes that this was initially brought forward or sought to be brought forward as one commercial property plan by the same developer using Mr. Mooney, who you heard from, as a common site planner. After that fell through, those efforts for both parcels fell through. They both presented townhome development plans to the city of Asheville. From information provided by the applicants, we understand that the ownership of those parcels is at least a direct familial relationship, that they're presenting the same type of development, townhomes, that they're using the same site planner, and that they may very well be doing work on the same sites at the same time, and also heavily modifying the same sewer line in the immediate vicinity of both projects. On that totality of the circumstances, city staff has concluded that these are phases of a larger plan. And you're now tasked with deciding whether that determination is right or wrong. You're just doing that by a preponderance of the evidence standard. So it is just, you've heard everything. Do you think it is more correct or not that city staff got it right, that these are phases of a larger project? So that's your task now. I don't think there's any evidence I've failed to recap for you, and that's our position, that based on that evidence, these are different phases of a larger plan.
I've got one question, and I'm going to ask this both to you and Mr. Sneed and see if you both
disagree.
Both disagree. Correct. Mr. Starbaum, I believe, said that staff has always interpreted those 4 things to be a partial but not inclusively total list of possibilities. Assuming that's true, can that be taken as I just forgot the word, a precedent for for the city's interpretation.
I would, staff decisions, I don't know if you would call it a precedent, it becomes a practice. Practices can quite often at this stage of the game get reinforced or abandoned, depending on the ruling of this board. That's where precedent probably comes in. If this comes up 2 or 3 times and the board upholds the way staff interprets it, that becomes something that's, I guess, precedent until Bob goes to the Superior Court and says, okay, Judge, did they get it right? But same flip side of it could be, of course, that you find that the reading is more limited than staff, and it takes you in a different direction. I can't tell you which direction that goes in, but a staff decision has a precedent in-house. It probably is. It's their practice, but it's not a precedent that's binding upon this board.
Thank you.
That's correct. He's dead.
Mr. Chair, can I add to that?
Yes.
So I want to clarify too that this is not done on the whim and whimsy. It is not that staff has this and just makes the decision ad hoc. There is a very clear standard operating procedure for getting the zoning administrator to then memorialize or provide a memorandum stating that there is this ambiguity in the code, and this is how it is then applied. So to make sure that everyone who does qualify, who does come in, who does reach out, who has these early assistances, receive the same amount and the same determination. It does go into practice, but that is not to say that it doesn't change. I mean, we have literal binders full of past administrative interpretations to tell us how to carry these out.
Okay, so would it be correct to say then that there have been previous times where you've interpreted I don't want to get this wrong, BC2, is that right? As including more than those 4 things to other people?
There would be occasions in which we had applied that to be a more exhaustive list, but the applicants were clear that it was phased for cultural or other reasons as well. So we have used other reasons not inclusive of that list, but those applications aren't necessarily an apples-to-apples comparison.
Thank you.
Please understand that, I respect Mr. Roast, and I thank him for his time. This is a very hard job because there's a lot of hypotheticals and if situations here, so it is hard to answer, so thank you for your patience as I
Sure.
sort of walk through those.
And, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think you put your finger on the situation is that the staff makes its interpretation. But what the Court of Appeals has recently said is the drafters of zoning ordinances that restrict property rights have a responsibility to provide clear rules on which property owner can rely. This is so because zoning regulations are not intended to be a system of murky, ambiguous rules where the permitted uses of property ultimately depend on the interpretive discretion of government bureaucrats. And that's our problem with this.
Mr. Richardson, could you comment on that?
Sorry.
Could you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so there is that canon of interpretation, which is correct. And I'll go a step further and call your attention back to what Mr. O said at the beginning of this, which is that zoning regulations are in derogation of the common law, which just means that by common law, you're allowed to do whatever the heck you want with your property. And so anytime that there's a clear ambiguity where you just can't tell what the zoning drafters intended by their words, you rule in favor of the property owner. That's correct. But what Mr. Oast left out from both that initial statement and this last quotation is that the sine qua non of interpreting zoning ordinances, like any law, is that you get to the legislative intent of the body passing it. And so if you find that it is more likely than not in your mind that the city of Asheville, in passing 795BC2, was what the city is saying, then you may properly rule on that basis because you've reached that point of, I think we know what the city intended by this ordinance and we can rule on it. And so, but if you think it's ambiguous, in the event of a tie, Mr. Oast is right. His clients are entitled to that tiebreaker.
Okay, are there we've reached the end of my list of things here. Any other questions that anyone on the board has for either for Mr. Roast or Mr. Edgerton?
Mr. Chairman, would it be acceptable if I had a clarification or question?
Sure.
For clarification? And I guess part of this comes from hearing all of this. I sort of get the feeling that my client somehow, because I am affiliated with both projects, may further muddy the waters. And so I guess my question about that is kind of in the future, and a hypothetical question. If on a project, say, that had townhomes and it was built and everything's fine, and then and I'd worked on it, but then 2 3/4 years later, another developer or whatever came to build a townhome, would it be incumbent to me to either excuse myself because of that affiliation and anyway, that it may penalize him in going to a level 2 as opposed to 1?
I can tell you with a strong caveat of, I am not permitted to give you legal advice. That your involvement is one of, I'd say, about 5 different things that in this very particular instance led staff to conclude that on the totality of those multiple different things, the repetition of which I doubt will ever happen again in the city of Asheville.
Well, you don't know.
That's a reason to consider that this is part of a larger plan, especially with the history of multiple different plans that were tried for this property with the same owners. But generally, this is not a big enough town, or this is not a big enough town that we can say that seeing the same design professional on Plan A as Plan B means that those two should be reviewed the same. We just don't have that many of you all in town. We're not going to have.
Well, I know.
I have a question for you, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Do you see tapping into a public line that there is any potential safety hazard?
That's beyond what we're dealing with here today.
Yeah, okay, yeah, no worries. Forget that.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have a question for you. Because we spoke about sidewalks and curbing earlier. You spoke.
Yes, ma'am.
What are the other benefits of keeping these two
But-
separate?
What?
What is the benefit of these being 2 separate projects? Why did you decide to divert from one larger project?
The only time that we were looking at this as an inclusive project with both properties was from the commercial side. That was when we were looking at those buildings. Because of the commercial buildings, their parking requirements were necessitated more land area. And so that's how we were looking at these 2. And then, as I mentioned in my testimony, based on that not turning out to be feasible, we went to the residential and then just focused on kinship because my studies in the commercial concepts, we were losing half of that property from Apex, so that was just being taken up in slope. And so there was no sense in basically losing that because the cost of doing that, you weren't being able to get the return that you would with a residential development. So that's why Apex was just sort of eliminated from the view when we were looking at the kinship property. Did that make sense? The only time we were looking at Apex in with the kinship property was when we were exploring it for commercial office space.
I understand.
Okay?
Well, Mr. Mooney, since you're up there, all right. You asked to come back up. This is on you. So have you engaged a civil engineer for both of these projects?
Excuse me?
Have you engaged a civil engineer
did.
for both of these projects? Are they the same civil engineer?
Yeah, they are.
And what about the architecture? Do you have 2 different architects?
2 different architects.
2 different architects. And the architectural styles, although townhomes are going to be designed differently?
Yes.
And the square footage of them are going to be,
Different. It's totally different price point. Kinship is 2-story and 3-story units.
okay.
It's a mix, and part of that was due to the grade, to accommodate the grade in the buildings. And then Apex is just a single 2-story all the way, and it's uniform.
Yeah, and they
Basically,
look real thin because that's a
cookie
smaller
cutter,
lot.
smaller square
Yeah,
footage.
okay. But so it's reasonable to assume that the civil engineer is going to be doing all of your closeouts for both of the projects and doing all of the construction administration for the projects
Yes.
and
for
coordinating with the surveyor for all the as-built survey
Right.
information for your sewer improvements and extension. Seems like from an economy of scale, it would be good to do it as one project.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm sorry, that was just my question from a professional standpoint with all that. It would kind of be limiting what we could do. Thanks.
Okay. Even though I think I know the answer to this question, I'm going to ask it because I always do. Is there anyone from the public who would like to weigh in on this? I didn't think so. Okay. Is there a motion from the board? Realizing that after a motion and a second, there's a discussion. And in case you haven't noticed, the little handout that I gave you gave the wording for.
I already lost it.
I move that the board rule in favor of the city and that determination of the city's code enforcement offer be affirmed.
Okay. Officer, okay. Is there a second to that?
I'll second.
Second, okay. So we have a motion to rule in favor of the city. Is there any discussion? Or, before I ask the question, let me say, only because I have a question, is there anything that anyone would like to ask Mr. Sneed about this?
I don't have anything to ask him.
Okay, I'm going to ask Mr. Sneed one question. Mr. Ost said basically the reason they're here is because they believe that staff made an error. Okay.
Correct.
Is there, aside from what's commonly known as Scrivener's errors, are there levels of errors from this is a small error to God, that guy must have been on dope?
This one unfortunately boils down to, was the staff right or wrong? You won't get too many black and white answers, and although you may get there through a lot of great material, your answer will have to be a black and white answer.
Thank you. Okay, now discussion.
Well,
I don't have any discussion.
I'm happy to dive in. So I am also a landscape architect and land planner, and I have come across this a time or two. Mostly it's when it's the difference between a level 2 and a level 3, because a level 3 kicks you into a whole different world of development pain and challenge. And like Mr. Mooney was saying, you know, having to talk to the neighborhood in a more careful way and really garnering their support and those types of things. And so I can understand when you initially tried to do this larger plan with offices and you realized we can't get the neighborhood behind us, that I would have done the same thing and said, let's back up and punt, what can we do? I have been told multiple times that, you know, waiting 3 years is a great way to circumvent the ordinance. That's been a statement that's been said before. And it's not untrue if you're trying to avoid cumulative development costs that come with going from one level of review to another level of review. One of the things that I'm really looking at is the word may. in that sentence. And if you go to, while may is subjective, it is defined in our ordinance, and it means it's permissive. I've shuffled my stuff around so much I can't remember where I put it. But it's basically, it's permissive in nature. Here it is. So it's not necessarily required. So in the instance of this sentence, if it said, and it has to have all of these things. It shall have walls, it shall have utilities, it shall have all these things. And what the ordinance is saying is it may include these things, but we can't think of all the things that may make a project need to be combined as a common plan, kicking it into this level 2 review. So that's one of the words that I'm kind of getting hung up on, and in my thought process on that. So I'll just put that out for just our conversation. I think that the LLCs that were created on the same day, it appears they're related in terms of addressing. So I know that ownership is not an issue. I think also what Mr. Mooney said about the civil engineer, it's incredibly difficult to do sewer improvements on projects of this magnitude. It's going to be a major sewer infrastructure project. It would be a real challenge to do one piece and then another, and then have multiple people out there doing construction administration and CA and surveyors doing, survey work and resolving multiple as-built survey plats and all of this stuff to tie it in together. It seems like there's no way that they wouldn't just do it all at one time. So that, in the early assistance meeting notes, it didn't look like Kevin Johnson was there, and he is with the MSD, with our sewage district, and so we don't really have what his thoughts were for that. We also don't have Nancy here, Nancy Watford, to speak to us a little bit more clearly about this common plan of development or sale, and how that NCGO 0001 permit is established and everything. The only thing that I thought about in this is, if you look at her notes, and she literally copies a definition from NCGS, and the first part of it is on page 2, and the second part is on page 3. And it talks that information may be used to determine a common plan of development, including plats, blueprints, marketing plans, contracts, building permits, public notices or hearings, zoning requests, and infrastructure development plans. And for me, really, the one triggering thing is this infrastructure development plan, because I feel as though there is going to be an infrastructure development plan that'll be an overall plan. So, but again, she's not here, so we have to just make some decisions based off of what we can ascertain in the early assistance notes on what we heard today from the witnesses. So that's where I am.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Ms. Gatsy, and I don't want to interject if it's not proper, but to clarify just on that exact point of the quotation.
Yeah.
I believe you said, quoting from general statute, it's not in a general statute, it's that administrative code provision, which is just a level below general statute that I read to Mr. Mooney. It's 15A NCAC 02H.1002 that I had asked him about. That's where that definition appears, and that's a definition for DEQ, to be clear, not the city's definition, but that is DEQ's definition for common plan of development.
Correct, but they will be looking at that definition as a guide or a requirement, would they not?
DEQ certainly would be.
Okay.
Is there anyone else on the board that has a question or comment? I'll make one thought. Looking at this subsection 2 that mentions the different phases of a larger plan that may or may not include shared parking facilities, access utilities, or walls, I've been kind of looking at that, and I've been saying to myself, well, in terms of, are these the only 4 things, or, you know, is it possible to add more things? If I were going to interpret that as being the only 4 things you could look at, I would look at it as that those 4 things were parts of some whole. I don't know how I would name that whole, but like, you know, the 4 quarters of the circle. And, you know, these 4 things are it because of some larger thing that they're part of. And I don't see that. They seem like 4 reasonable things, and they seem sort of vaguely connected, but I don't see any reason to believe that it would be incorrect to not add other relevant things that might be phases of a larger plan. So that, you know, I tend to side with the city on that particular argument.
Yeah, I think that goes back to my may or may not include these items. So it's basically saying it may include these items, it may include other items that aren't
Yeah, right, just because it
necessarily
doesn't
listed.
say other items, I don't think.
Correct. Yeah.
I think as someone said, I think the intent of the city when they wrote, or the intent of whoever wrote this, was not to exclude everything other than those 4 things.
I agree, and Suzanne, thank you for your input. I was interested to see what you thought with your background. I think cases like this are how our UDO gets a little bit thicker and a little bit longer and more definitive. Personally, with the amount of overlap and, you know, moving the sewer, if a certain project gets through and just the amount of overlap in the 2 projects, I can see just how they could constitute as one. I also came from real estate development, and we often had multiple price points, multiple levels of development as well in the different projects I've worked on. So, but I understand this is a unique case, you know, not one that I've seen in the city before.
It sticks out to me, and 2 over and over again, the projects will be considered a common plan of development if the same ownership prototype, product type, or marketing. It's a common plan of development, means a site where multiple separate and distinct development activities may be taking place at different times on different schedules, but governed by a single development plan, regardless of ownership. That sticks out to me.
Any other thoughts, comments? Okay, board members, when I say your name, please say aye or nay. Ms. Johnson?
Remind me of what I'm agreeing with. It's late, my watch is dead, I don't know what time it is.
The motion is I move the board rule in favor of the city and that the determination of the city's code enforcement officer be affirmed.
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Ms. White?
Aye.
And Paul Wazinski votes aye. The ruling is in favor of the city.
Thank you for your time, everyone. Do we have any other official? Yeah.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll make a